3 days she waited in that frozen station. No food, no shelter, just a promise that never came. Clara Wynne had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, only to discover she'd been summoned by a desperate child, not the widowed rancher at all. When that little girl finally appeared, breathless and begging, "Can you be my mama?" Clara faced an impossible choice. Walk away from this beautiful mistake, or risk her broken heart one last time. Welcome to their story. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this journey has traveled. Now let me take you back to that bitter winter of 1889. The train's whistle cut through the Wyoming wilderness like a knife through silk, sharp, final, and fading fast into nothing. Clara Wynne stood on the platform with her fingers wrapped so tight around her suitcase handle that her knuckles had gone white beneath the torn fabric of her gloves. The leather was split along the seams, exposing raw, reddened skin to the January wind that came howling down from the mountains like something alive and hungry. She was 26 years old, and she was entirely alone. The conductor had already swung back aboard, his face disappearing into the warm glow of the passenger car. Through the frosted windows, Clara could see other travelers settling into their seats, a mother smoothing her daughter's hair, a businessman opening his newspaper, a young couple leaning close and laughing about something private and warm. The train lurched forward with a groan of iron and steam, and then it was moving, picking up speed, carrying all that light and warmth away from her until there was nothing left but the empty tracks stretching into the gray distance and the sound of her own breathing, harsh and quick in the cold. The station was hardly more than a shed, weathered pine boards silvered by years of mountain weather, a single bench beneath an overhang that did almost nothing to keep out the snow. A hand-painted sign above the door read Copper Ridge Station, but the paint was so faded that Clara had to squint to make out the letters. There was supposed to be a station master, but the small office was dark, the door hanging slightly ajar and banging in the wind with a rhythm that set her teeth on edge. She stood there for a long moment, watching the train disappear around the bend where the tracks cut between two massive shoulders of stone. When the last wisp of steam finally vanished, the silence that rushed in to fill its place was so complete it felt like drowning. Clara set her suitcase down on the platform and pulled the letter from her coat pocket. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded so many times, the ink slightly smeared where her thumb had worried at it during the long journey west. She didn't need to read it again, she had every word memorized, but she looked at it anyway, as if the act of seeing the handwriting might somehow make it more real, might conjure the man who was supposed to be here waiting for her. "Dear Miss Wynne," it began, in a hand that was careful and deliberate, each letter formed with the kind of precision that suggested the writer was unused to putting pen to paper. "I am in need of a wife. My daughter needs a mother. If you are willing to come west and make a home with us, I promise you will want for nothing. I am a rancher with good land and a sound house. I cannot promise you romance, but I can promise you respect, provision, and a place to belong. If this suits you, come to Copper Ridge Station on January 15th. I will be there to meet you. Yours in hope, Elias Turner." January 15th, today. Clara looked up from the letter to the empty platform, to the snow-covered road that wound away from the station toward what she assumed was the town proper, though she couldn't see any buildings from here. The landscape was vast and white and silent, mountains rising like broken teeth against a sky the color of old pewter, stands of pines so dark they were nearly black, and everywhere the snow, falling steadily now in thick, wet flakes that caught in her eyelashes and melted on her cheeks like tears. No one was coming. The realization settled over her slowly, the way cold seeps through layers of clothing when you've been standing still too long. It started as a small, tight knot of anxiety in her chest, then spread outward until her whole body felt heavy with it. She had sold everything she owned to buy the train ticket west. She had said goodbye to the tiny boarding house room in Boston where she'd lived for the past 2 years, to the other shop girls who'd wished her well with voices full of envy and doubt. She had sat up through 3 nights of travel, too nervous to sleep, imagining the life that waited for her at the end of the line. A husband, a home, a child who would call her mother. She had imagined wrong. Clara picked up her suitcase and walked to the bench, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. She brushed off the seat and sat down, arranging her skirts carefully around her legs for whatever warmth they might provide. The wind cut through her wool coat as if it were made of paper. She had a shawl in her suitcase, but the thought of opening it here, of admitting she would be staying long enough to need more layers, felt like giving up. So she sat and she waited, and she told herself that there must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps his wagon had broken a wheel. Perhaps the snow had delayed him. Perhaps he was coming even now, would appear at any moment with apologies and explanations, and they would laugh about this someday. Remember that terrible first day when I nearly froze to death waiting for you? The afternoon faded into evening. The snow kept falling. The station master never appeared, and neither did Elias Turner. When the light finally failed completely, Clara did open her suitcase. She pulled out her shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders, then took out the small bundle of food she'd packed for the journey, a heel of bread, gone stale now, and a wedge of cheese that had seen better days. She ate slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing. The cold had moved from her fingers and toes into her core, settling deep in her bones. She thought about the letter tucked back into her pocket. I promise you will want for nothing. Well, that promise was already broken. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Clara had never known cold like this, the kind that makes your breath freeze in your lungs, that turns your fingers so numb you can't feel them anymore, and you have to look down to check if you're still holding onto your suitcase. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to make herself as small as possible, trying to conserve whatever warmth her body still produced. She must have dozed. She couldn't call it sleep, not really, just a kind of gray semi-consciousness where the cold and the darkness and the sound of the wind all blurred together. When she jerked awake, she couldn't immediately remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. The empty platform, the letter, the terrible understanding that she had come all this way for nothing. The sky was beginning to lighten, just barely, turning from black to the deep blue that comes before dawn. Clara's whole body ached. Her fingers were so stiff she could barely move them. When she tried to stand, her legs nearly gave out beneath her, and she had to grab the edge of the bench to keep from falling. She needed to move, needed to get her blood flowing before the cold finished what it had started. She stamped her feet and swung her arms, feeling pins and needles shoot through her extremities as the circulation slowly returned. It hurt so badly she wanted to cry, but she was too cold even for tears. The second day was worse than the first. The station remained empty. No trains came. The schedule Clara had studied so carefully back in Boston apparently didn't account for winter storms in Wyoming. No one walked up the road from town. The station master's office stayed dark and silent. Clara was completely, utterly alone. She rationed her food carefully, knowing she'd need to make it last. By mid-morning, she'd finished the bread and cheese. All she had left was half an apple, bruised and withered, and a few sips of water in her canteen that sloshed with chips of ice. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold and the wind. When she tried to stand again, the world tilted sickeningly, and she had to sit back down fast, her head spinning. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like a living thing. Cold had become her constant companion, so familiar now that she almost couldn't remember what warmth felt like. But worse than either of those was the shame that burned in her chest like a coal, hot and bitter and choking. What kind of man makes a promise like that and then simply doesn't come? What kind of woman is fool enough to travel 2,000 miles for a man she's never met? Clara pulled the letter out again with fingers that could barely grip the paper. She stared at those careful words, I promise you will want for nothing, and felt something crack inside her chest. She had wanted so badly to believe in this, needed to believe that somewhere in this vast country there was a place where she belonged, where she was wanted, where she could finally stop being Clara Wynne, the orphan, the shop girl, the woman nobody chose. Maybe he saw my photo and changed his mind, she whispered to the empty air. It was the only explanation that made sense. She'd sent her picture with her letter of acceptance, just as he'd requested. It wasn't a good photograph. She'd paid too much for it at a studio in Boston, sitting rigid and unsmiling while the photographer fussed with his equipment. In the image, she looked severe, with her dark hair pulled back tight and her jaw set and her eyes hollow from too many long shifts at the textile mill. She didn't look like the kind of woman a man would want to marry. She didn't look soft or pretty or gentle. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who had survived but only barely. The wind picked up as the afternoon wore on. driving the snow sideways so it stung Clara's face like needles. She pulled her shawl up over her head and huddled deeper into her coat, but it did no good. The cold was absolute. It swallowed everything: sound, light, hope. By the third day, Clara had stopped expecting anyone to come. She woke, if you could call it waking, to find herself covered in a thin layer of snow, her body so stiff she could barely move. The sun was higher than she'd realized. She must have been unconscious for hours. When she tried to brush the snow away, her hand shook so badly she could barely coordinate her movements. She needed to make a decision. She couldn't stay here forever. Either she needed to try to walk into town, wherever that was, or she needed to accept that she wasn't going to survive this. The thought came to her with surprising clarity. She might die here. She might actually die here, alone on this frozen platform, waiting for a man who was never coming. The strange thing was how little emotion accompanied the thought. She wasn't frightened, exactly. She was too cold and too tired for fear. There was almost a relief to it, the idea that the struggle might finally be over, that she could stop fighting and just let the cold have her. But then, beneath the numbness, something else stirred. It felt like anger, but fiercer than that. Hotter. Clara Wynne had survived too much to die on a train platform in Wyoming. She'd survived the orphanage where she'd been raised after her parents died of fever when she was 6. She'd survived 10 years in that place, with its thin gruel and thinner blankets, its hard beds and harder matrons. She'd survived going into service at 16, working 16-hour days in houses where she was invisible, where she scrubbed floors until her hands bled and was expected to be grateful for the privilege. She'd survived the textile mill in Boston, the machines that ate fingers and lives, the air so thick with cotton dust you could barely breathe, the foreman who thought the girls who worked for him were his to touch however he pleased. She'd survived all of that, and she'd done it alone, with nothing but her own stubborn will to keep going. She wasn't going to give up now. Clara forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her. The world swayed and blurred, going gray at the edges. She grabbed her suitcase with fingers that could barely close around the handle and took one step, then another. She didn't know where she was going, just away from the station, toward the road, toward whatever came next. She made it maybe 10 feet before her knees buckled. She went down hard, landing in the snow with an impact that knocked the breath from her lungs. For a long moment, she just lay there, cheek pressed against the cold ground, watching snowflakes fall past her eyes. They were beautiful, she realized distantly. Each one different, intricate, perfect. She wondered if this was what people saw when they died. Small, beautiful details that they'd been too busy to notice while they were living. She was just starting to close her eyes when she heard it, the sound of boots crunching in snow. At first, Clara thought she was imagining it. 3 days of cold and hunger and disappointment had left her half delirious. But then she heard it again, crunch, 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 getting closer. She tried to lift her head, but she didn't have the strength. All she could do was lie there in the snow and wait and hope that whoever was coming might show her mercy. The footsteps stopped. There was a long pause, then a small, breathless voice. "That's her! That's the lady from the picture!" Clara's heart gave a painful lurch. A child. It was a child's voice. With an enormous effort, she managed to roll onto her back. The movement sent sparks of pain through her frozen limbs, but she barely felt them. All her attention was fixed on the figure standing above her, a little girl in a wool bonnet, her cheeks flushed bright pink from the cold, her eyes wide and wondering. Behind the child, a man stood silhouetted against the gray sky. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a beard. He wore a heavy coat and carried himself with the kind of solid presence that suggested he spent his days doing hard physical work. He was staring down at Clara with an expression of complete bewilderment. Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper, rough and cracked from disuse. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I'm your mail-order bride. I got your letter." The man took a step closer, his boots crunching in the snow beside her head. Up close, she could see his face more clearly, strong features, weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that were a startling pale blue against his tanned skin. He looked to be in his mid-30s, maybe a bit older. There were lines around his mouth and between his brows that suggested he didn't smile much. "Ma'am." He crouched down beside her, and his voice was deep and careful, like someone trying not to spook a frightened animal. I never wrote you. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The edges of her vision went dark, and she thought she might actually faint. I did, the little girl said suddenly. Her voice was small and trembling, but determined. I wrote the letter. Mrs. Dallow helped me spell the words. She looked up at the man, her father, Clara realized, with tears starting to spill down her flushed cheeks. I just wanted a mama. I'm sorry, Papa. I'm so sorry, but I wanted a mama so bad. The silence that followed was absolute. The man, Elias Turner, if the letter had told the truth about at least that much, stared at his daughter with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly. But beneath that, something that looked almost like pain. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked back down at Clara with those pale blue eyes. How long have you been here? He asked quietly. 3 days. Clara's voice was barely audible, even to herself. I came on the 15th, like the letter said. She watched something change in his face, the shock giving way to horror as he seemed to realize what that meant. 3 days, in this cold, with no shelter and no food. Christ, he breathed. He was already moving, shrugging out of his heavy coat. Mara, run back to the wagon and get the extra blankets. Quick now. The little girl, Mara, didn't move. She was staring at Clara with huge, frightened eyes, tears streaming down her face. Is she going to die? Papa, is she going to die because of what I did? No, Elias said firmly, wrapping his coat around Clara's shoulders. The weight of it was incredible, and the warmth trapped in its folds felt like a miracle. No one's dying. But I need you to run, Mara, fast as you can. Can you do that for me? Mara nodded and took off running, her small figure disappearing around the side of the station building. Elias turned his attention back to Clara, his big hands moving efficiently as he tucked the coat more securely around her. Can you stand? He asked. I'm not sure. I'm going to lift you. Is that all right? Clara nodded. She was too cold and too exhausted to care about propriety anymore. She felt his arms slide beneath her, one under her shoulders, one under her knees, and then she was being lifted as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Her head lolled against his chest, and she could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady through his shirt. He carried her through the snow, his stride long and sure despite her weight and the uneven ground. Clara tried to stay awake, tried to pay attention to where they were going, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. The last thing she registered was the sound of a horse snorting and stamping, and Mara's small voice saying, I got the blankets, Papa. And then darkness swallowed her whole. Psha. When Clara woke, she was warm. For a long, disoriented moment, that was the only thing she could process. Warmth. It surrounded her, pressed against her skin, seeped into her bones. After 3 days of cold so profound it had become her entire world, the sensation was almost overwhelming. She couldn't think, couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten here. All she could do was lie still and feel the impossible luxury of not being cold. Gradually, other sensations filtered in. She was lying on something soft. A bed, she realized, with a real mattress and clean sheets that smelled faintly of lye soap and lavender. There were blankets piled on top of her, heavy and warm. Somewhere nearby, a fire crackled. She could hear voices, low and concerned. She's been asleep for almost a full day. That was Elias, his deep voice recognizable even though Clara had only heard him speak a few times. I'm worried. Should we send for Doc Morrison? Give her time. A woman's voice, older and firm. Her body's been through hell, from the looks of her. Sleep's probably the best medicine right now. Just keep her warm and get fluids into her when she wakes. But she will wake. This was Mara, her voice high and frightened. Promise she'll wake, Mrs. Dallow. I can't promise anything, child. But she's young, and she's stronger than she looks, or she wouldn't have lasted 3 days in that cold. Have faith. Clara tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt like they were weighted with stones. She managed to make a small sound, more of a whimper than actual speech, and suddenly there were footsteps hurrying toward her. She's waking, Papa! She's waking! A cool hand touched Clara's forehead, then her wrist, checking her pulse. Miss Wynne? Can you hear me? I'm Mrs. Dallow. You're safe now. You're in Elias Turner's home." This time, Clara managed to get her eyes open. The light was dim, just the glow from a fireplace, but it still made her squint. Shapes gradually resolved into people. An elderly woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes bending over her, Elias standing a few feet back with his arms crossed and his expression tight with concern, and Mara hovering at the foot of the bed, her small hands gripping the wooden footboard so hard her knuckles were white. "Water," Clara croaked. "Of course." Mrs. Dallow turned to Elias. "Get that pitcher from the kitchen and bring a cup." He left immediately, his heavy footsteps receding. Mrs. Dallow helped Clara sit up, propping pillows behind her back. The movement made Clara's head swim, but it wasn't as bad as she'd feared. She was weak, certainly, but not as devastatingly so as she'd been on the platform. Elias returned with a pottery pitcher and a cup. He poured carefully, his large hands surprisingly deft, then held the cup while Clara drank. The water was cool and clean, and it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She drank 3 cups before she finally sat back against the pillows, exhausted by even that small effort. "Better?" Mrs. Dallow asked. Clara nodded. Her throat was less raw now, and her head was clearing. She looked around the room properly for the first time. It was small but clean, with log walls chinked with mud and whitewash. The furniture was simple but well made: a dresser, a rocking chair, a small table beside the bed. There were curtains on the single window and a braided rug on the floor. Everything spoke of careful attention, of someone who took pride in their home even if they didn't have much. "Where am I?" Claire asked. "My house," Elias said, "about 3 miles from the station. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. If I'd known—" He trailed off, his jaw working. Clara could see the guilt in his face, the weight of it. "It wasn't your fault," she said quietly. Then she looked at Mara, who was still gripping the footboard and watching Clara with huge, terrified eyes. "It wasn't hers, either." Mara's face crumpled. "But I lied. I forged Papa's name. I made you come all this way, and you almost died, and it's all my fault." "Mara," Elias said, not unkindly, "that's enough." But Clara shook her head. "Come here," she said to the girl. Mara hesitated, then slowly walked around the side of the bed. Up close, Clara could see that she was maybe 7 or 8 years old, with her father's pale blue eyes and dark hair that hung in 2 braids down her back. She was small for her age, thin in a way that suggested she'd had a hard winter, or maybe several of them. "I'm not angry with you," Clara said. "Do you understand? I'm not angry." "But you should be," Mara whispered. "You should hate me." "I don't hate you. I could never hate someone brave enough to do what you did." Clara reached out and took one of Mara's small hands in hers. "You wanted a mother so badly that you were willing to write to a complete stranger and ask her to come here. That takes courage. It was wrong to lie to your father, yes, but I understand why you did it." Tears spilled down Mara's cheeks. "Do you really?" "I do. Because I know what it's like to want something so much it hurts, to want a family, a home, a place where you belong." Clara's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. "That's why I came. Not because I believed in your father's letter. I didn't even know him. I came because I wanted the same things you do. So if you're brave enough to ask for what you need, I can be brave enough to forgive you for how you asked." Mara threw herself forward, wrapping her thin arms around Clara's neck and sobbing into her shoulder. Clara held her, stroking her hair, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door long closed, finally swinging wide. Over Mara's head, Clara met Elias's eyes. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude, or something else entirely. After a moment, he looked away, his jaw tight. Mrs. Dallow cleared her throat. "Well," she said briskly, "I'd say that's enough excitement for one day. Miss Wynne needs rest, and this child needs supper." She gently detached Mara from Clara and steered her toward the door. "Come on, little one. Let's see what we can make of those potatoes in the kitchen." Mara went reluctantly, looking back over her shoulder at Clara, until Mrs. Dallow guided her out and closed the door behind them. Clara was left alone with Elias. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Clara studied him more carefully now that she was conscious and coherent. He was a good-looking man, she supposed, in a rough sort of way, all hard edges and calloused hands and eyes that had seen their share of trouble. There was a scar along his left temple, faded with age. He held himself like someone accustomed to hard work, to long days and little rest. "I don't know what to say to you," he finally admitted. "I don't know how to make this right." "You can start by telling me the truth," Clara said. "Did you know that she'd written the letter?" "No." The word was firm, immediate. "I had no idea. I swear it. If I'd known, I would have— Christ, I don't know what I would have done, but I never would have let you come all this way for nothing." Clara believed him. She could hear the honesty in his voice, see it in the set of his shoulders. "How did she even do it?" she asked. "A child that young, she can't have known how to arrange something like that." Elias sighed and pulled the rocking chair closer to the bed, sitting down heavily. "Mrs. Dallow has a catalog, one of those matrimonial periodicals where people advertise for spouses. Mara must have found your ad in there. She convinced Mrs. Dallow to help her write the letter, told her I'd agreed to it. I didn't know until today, when Mrs. Dallow came to me confused about why I hadn't gone to meet you at the station. And when you went to the station, I was already half frozen." "Yes." Clara was quiet for a moment, processing all of this. The sheer audacity of it, a 7-year-old child orchestrating a mail-order marriage because she was lonely. It should have made her angry. Instead, she felt a strange sort of admiration. "She must miss her mother very much," Clara said softly. Something shuddered in Elias's face. "My wife died 2 years ago. Fever. Mara was only 5. I'm sorry." "So am I." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I've tried to be both parents to her. I've tried to be enough. But I'm not a soft man, Miss Wynne. I don't know how to braid hair or tell bedtime stories or any of the things my wife used to do. I work from sunup to sundown just to keep this place running. And at the end of the day, I'm so tired I can barely speak. Mara deserves better than what I can give her." There was such raw pain in his voice that Clara felt something twist in her chest. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she didn't know him well enough for that. They were strangers, after all, no matter what his daughter might have hoped. "What happens now?" she asked instead. Elias looked up at her, and for the first time she saw real uncertainty in his face. "I don't know. I suppose that depends on you." "What do you mean?" "You came here expecting to become a wife and mother. I can't offer you that. I won't marry a woman I just met out of obligation. But I can offer you a roof over your head, at least until you're well enough to travel. And if you need help getting back east or finding work somewhere nearby, I'll do what I can to assist you." He paused, then added quietly, "It's the least I can do after what you've been through." Clara listened to this little speech with growing frustration. He was being reasonable, even generous, but there was something about the careful distance in his tone that grated on her, as if she were a problem to be solved, a debt to be paid. As if the 3 days she'd spent freezing on that platform were just an unfortunate accident that could be tidied up with a few practical arrangements. "I see," she said coolly. "So you're offering me charity?" Elias frowned. "I'm offering you help." "It's the same thing." Clara sat up straighter, ignoring the way the room tilted slightly. "I came here because I was promised something. I was promised a home, a family, a place where I belonged. I didn't come here to be someone's obligation or someone's burden. I came here hoping for a life." I understand that, but do you?" Claire's voice was sharper now, months of frustration and disappointment bleeding through. "Do you understand what it's like to have nothing? To be so desperate for something better that you'll travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger? To risk everything on the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out there wants you?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "No, I don't understand that, but I do understand that you're angry, and you have every right to be. I don't know what you want from me, Miss Wynne." Clara didn't know either. That was the problem. She didn't know what she wanted, what she expected, what she should even ask for. All she knew was that she'd come so far, survived so much, and now she was being offered a temporary bed and bus fare home, like some kind of consolation prize. She was tired. God, she was so tired. I need to rest, she said finally, her anger deflating as quickly as it had risen. Can we talk about this later? Of course. Elias stood up, the chair creaking as his weight left it. Get some sleep. Mrs. Dallow will check on you in a few hours. Make sure you're eating and drinking enough. And Miss Wynne? She looked up at him. Thank you for being kind to Mara. She's been so scared since we found you. Thought you'd hate her. You could have been cruel and you weren't. I won't forget that. He left before Clara could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone in the dim room, Clara lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. The firelight played across the rough-hewn beams, casting shifting shadows. She could hear voices in another part of the house. Mrs. Dallow's firm tones, Mara's higher voice asking questions, Elias's deep rumble in response. The sounds of a family, however fractured. She closed her eyes and felt tears slide down her temples into her hair. She'd come so far, survived so much. And now she didn't know what came next. All she knew was that she was too tired, too hurt, and too proud to accept charity from a man who saw her as a problem to be solved. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would figure out what to do. Tonight, she would just sleep. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and something baking, bread maybe, or biscuits. For a moment she lay still with her eyes closed, listening to the sounds of morning filtering through the door. Water being poured, the clank of a pot on the stove, footsteps moving back and forth across what she assumed was the kitchen. And underneath it all, voices. Papa, is she awake yet? That was Mara, speaking in a whisper that was somehow louder than if she'd used her normal voice. Not yet. Let her sleep, little one. She needs it. Elias sounded tired, like he hadn't slept much himself. But what if she leaves? What if she wakes up and decides to go back east and we never see her again? There was a pause, the kind that suggested Elias was choosing his words carefully. Then that's her choice to make. We can't force her to stay, Mara. What you did, writing that letter, it wasn't right. You understand that, don't you? I know. Mara's voice was small and miserable. I thought if she came here and met us, she'd want to stay. I thought maybe she'd love us. Clara's chest tightened. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling beams, listening. Love doesn't work that way, Elias said gently. It takes time. Trust. You can't trick someone into loving you, sweetheart. It has to grow natural, like plants in a garden. You have to tend it careful and give it time to put down roots. But you loved Mama right away. You told me once that you knew the first time you saw her that you'd marry her. That was different. How? Another pause, longer this time. When Elias spoke again, his voice was rough. Your mama and I met at a church social. She was singing with the choir, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. After the service, I worked up the courage to introduce myself, and we talked for hours. She was the kindest, warmest person I'd ever met. Everything about her was light and laughter and joy. She made me want to be a better man. He stopped, and Clara heard him take a shaky breath. But even then, even feeling what I felt, I courted her proper. I took my time. I let her get to know me, and I got to know her. It was 6 months before I asked her to marry me. And she said yes right away. She did, but that was because we'd built something real between us. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Mara. You can't rush these things. You can't force them. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a very small voice, she said, Do you think you'll ever love someone like that again? The silence that followed was so complete that Clara held her breath, straining to hear. I don't know, Elias finally said, and his voice was so sad it made Clara's throat ache. I don't know if I have that in me anymore. Clara heard footsteps moving away, then the sound of the front door opening and closing. Through the window beside her bed, she could see Elias crossing the yard toward the barn, his shoulders hunched against the cold morning air. She sat up slowly, testing her body's response. She was still weak, still sore, but the bone-deep exhaustion had lifted. Her head was clear, and the trembling that had plagued her limbs was gone. She pushed back the covers and swung her legs over the side of the bed, waiting a moment to make sure the room wouldn't spin. Someone had left clean clothes folded on the dresser, a simple brown dress, woolen stockings, and undergarments. They weren't hers. which meant they must have belonged to Elias's wife. The thought should have felt strange, wearing a dead woman's clothes, but Clara had worn hand-me-downs her entire life. At least these fit properly. She dressed slowly, her fingers still a bit clumsy with the buttons, then braided her dark hair and pinned it up. There was a small mirror above the dresser, and she studied her reflection critically. She looked terrible, pale and hollow-eyed, with chapped lips and bruises under her eyes from exhaustion. But she was alive, and she was standing, and that was more than she'd managed 3 days ago. When she opened the bedroom door, she found Mara sitting on the floor just outside, her back against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest. The girl jumped to her feet the moment she saw Clara, her eyes wide. "You're awake! Are you feeling better? Do you need anything? Water? Food? Papa made biscuits, and there's honey, and—" "Mara." Clara held up a hand, but she was smiling. "Breathe, I'm fine. Or at least I'm much better than I was." Mara's whole body seemed to sag with relief. "I was so worried. I've been sitting here since dawn waiting to hear you moving around." "Your father didn't tell you to let me sleep?" "He did, but I wanted to be here when you woke up. I wanted to—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "I wanted to make sure you were really all right." Clara crouched down so she was at eye level with the girl. "I'm really all right, thanks to you and your father. And Mrs. Dallow, she's the one who knew what to do. Then I owe her my thanks as well." Clara straightened up, her knees protesting the movement. "Is she still here?" "No, she went home last night after you fell asleep, but she'll be back later to check on you. She always keeps her promises." Mara reached out hesitantly, then took Clara's hand. "Come to the kitchen. You need to eat. Papa says you probably haven't had a proper meal in days." She wasn't wrong. Clara's stomach was a tight knot of hunger, and the smell of those biscuits was making her lightheaded. She let Mara lead her through the small house, taking in her surroundings properly for the first time. It was a simple cabin, just 4 rooms from what she could see. The bedroom where she'd slept, another smaller bedroom that must belong to Mara, and a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. Everything was clean and orderly, but there was a bareness to it that spoke of loss. No curtains on some of the windows, no decorations on the walls. The furniture was functional but sparse, as if someone had taken away half of what had once been there, and no one had thought to replace it. The kitchen table was set for 3, with mismatched plates and cups. A pot of coffee sat warming on the stove, and a basket of biscuits sat in the center of the table, steam still rising from them. There was butter, honey, and a small jar of what looked like strawberry preserves. "Sit! Sit!" Mara pulled out a chair for Clara, then scurried around getting things ready. She poured coffee, too much cream, but Clara didn't have the heart to say anything, and loaded a plate with biscuits. "Papa went to feed the animals, but he'll be back soon. He said I should make sure you ate something the minute you woke up." Clara took a bite of biscuit and nearly groaned. It was still warm from the oven, flaky and tender, with a hint of salt that made the butter and honey sing. She ate 3 before she even realized what she was doing, her body crying out for sustenance after days of deprivation. Mara watched her with undisguised satisfaction. "Papa's a really good cook. He learned from his mother back in Ohio. She ran a boarding house, and she taught him how to make all kinds of things. Not fancy things, but good solid food that sticks to your ribs. That's what he always says, stick to your ribs." "It's delicious," Clara said honestly. "Best biscuits I've had in years." Mara beamed, then her expression turned serious. "Miss Wynne, I need to ask you something." "Clara. You can call me Clara." "Clara," Mara repeated, testing the name. "Are you going to leave? Papa said it's your choice, but I need to know. Because if you're going to go, I'd rather know now, so I don't start hoping too much." Clara set down her coffee cup and looked at the girl across from her. Mara was trying so hard to be brave, to act grown up, but she was just a child. A lonely, grieving child who'd been desperate enough to forge a letter and lie to the adults in her life because she wanted a mother so badly. "I don't know yet," Clara said, choosing honesty over comfort. "I need to think. I need to understand what I'd be staying for, if I stayed." "You'd be staying for us, for me and Papa." "I'd be staying as what, though? Your father made it clear he's not looking for a wife. And I didn't come all this way to be a housekeeper or a hired girl. I've been that before. I won't be that again." Mara's face fell. So you are leaving? I didn't say that. I said I need to think. Clara reached across the table and took the girl's hand. Mara, what you did, bringing me here, it was brave and it was desperate, and I understand why you did it. But you have to understand something, too. You can't build a family on a lie, even a well-meaning one. Your father and I, we're strangers. We don't know each other. We don't owe each other anything. If I stay, it has to be because we both choose it, not because you tricked us into it, and not because your father feels obligated to take care of me. But you could choose it, Mara said urgently. If you gave us a chance, if you stayed long enough to really know us, you could choose to stay, couldn't you? Before Clara could answer, the front door opened and Elias stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He stopped when he saw Clara sitting at the table, his expression unreadable. Miss Wynne, you're up. Clara, please, I think we're past formalities at this point. He nodded, closing the door behind him and hanging his coat on a peg. Clara, how are you feeling? Better, weak, but better. Your biscuits helped. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. They're nothing special, just flour and lard. They're perfect, Clara said firmly. Thank you. For this and for everything else. Taking me in, caring for me. I know I'm not your responsibility. Elias crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee, taking his time about it. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was carefully neutral. We need to talk about what happens next. I know. Mara, why don't you go gather the eggs? I saw a few in the henhouse this morning. But, Papa, now, please. Mara shot Clara one last pleading look, then grabbed a basket from beside the door and slipped outside. The moment she was gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Elias took a seat at the table across from Clara, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what you said yesterday, about not wanting charity. I meant it. I know you did, and I respect that. But here's the thing, Miss Clara. You're in a difficult position. You're 2,000 miles from where you started, in the middle of winter, with no money and nowhere to go. Those are just facts. I'm not saying them to make you feel bad. I'm saying them because we need to be practical about this. Clara felt her spine stiffen. I'm well aware of my situation, thank you. I'm sure you are. So let me lay out what I'm thinking, and you can tell me if it makes sense. He took a sip of coffee, then continued. You need a place to stay, at least until spring. The roads are barely passable right now, and they'll only get worse as winter goes on. Even if you wanted to leave tomorrow, it wouldn't be safe. So that's 4, maybe 5 months we're talking about. I won't accept charity for 5 months. I'm not offering charity, I'm offering work. He leaned forward slightly. This house needs help. I'll be honest with you. Since my wife died, things have gotten away from me. I work the ranch from sunup to sundown, and I do my best with the cooking and the cleaning, but it's not enough. Mara needs supervision. She needs someone to teach her things I don't know how to teach. The house needs a woman's touch. And I need... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I need help. I'm drowning here, and I'm too proud to admit it most of the time, but I'm admitting it now. Clara studied him carefully. What exactly are you proposing? Stay through the winter, help with the house, with Mara, with the things I can't manage on my own. In exchange, you get room and board, and I'll pay you a wage. Nothing fancy, but enough that by spring you'll have money in your pocket. Enough to decide what comes next on your own terms, without desperation making the choice for you. It was a reasonable offer. More than reasonable, actually, but something about it still rankled. So I'd be your housekeeper. You'd be Elias frowned, searching for words. You'd be someone who lives here and helps run this household. That's different from being hired help. Is it? I think so. Hired help has set hours and specific duties. What I'm talking about is more flexible. You'd be part of the household, part of the family, in a way, but not actually family. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and pointed. Elias's jaw tightened. No, he said quietly. Not actually family. I won't lie to you and pretend this is something it's not. I barely know you. You barely know me. I'm not going to marry you just because my daughter wrote you a letter. I'm not asking you to marry me. Aren't you? Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I came here expecting to be a wife and mother. Yes, that's what your daughter's letter promised. But I'm not some desperate woman who'll throw herself at the first man who shows her kindness. I have some pride left, Mr. Turner. Elias, and I know you do. That's one of the first things I noticed about you, that pride. You've got a spine of steel. He set down his coffee cup. Look, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to find a solution that works for both of us. You need somewhere to stay. I need help. That's not charity or obligation. That's just two people helping each other out. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to throw his practical solution back in his face and tell him she didn't need his help. But the truth was, she did need it. She had nowhere else to go, no other options. And 5 months from now, with money saved and spring coming, she'd be in a much better position to decide her future. What about Mara? She asked. She's not going to understand that this is temporary. She's going to think I'm staying forever. I'll make sure she understands. Will she, though? She's a child who wants a mother so badly she committed fraud to get one. Do you really think you can make her understand that I'm just here as paid help? Elias rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't know. Probably not. But what's the alternative? Send you back east with nothing? Let you starve or freeze because my daughter made a mistake? You keep calling it a mistake, but maybe it wasn't. The words were out before Clara could stop them. Elias looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Mara saw something you couldn't. Maybe she knew that this house needs more than just a housekeeper. Maybe she knew that you need more than that. Clara's heart was pounding now, but she pushed on. You said your wife died 2 years ago. That's a long time to be alone. To raise a daughter by yourself in this wilderness. Maybe Mara thought you deserved someone to share the burden with. I don't need... Everyone needs someone, Clara interrupted. That's not weakness. That's just being human. They stared at each other across the table, the air between them charged with something Clara couldn't quite name. Elias looked like he wanted to argue, to deny what she'd said, but something held him back. Finally, he said, So what do you want? What would make this work for you? Clara thought about it. What did she want? Not charity, certainly, not to be treated like hired help, but not to force herself into a family that didn't really want her either. I want to be honest, she said slowly. I want us to be honest with each other. No pretending this is something it's not, but no pretending it's less than it is either. If I stay, I'll help with the house, and I'll help with Mara because that's what needs doing. But I won't be invisible. I won't be someone you barely acknowledge except when you need something. I lived that way for too many years. I won't do it again. Fair enough. And I want you to tell Mara the truth. Not a lie about me being permanent, but not a lie about me being temporary either. Tell her that we're all figuring this out together. Tell her that I'm staying for the winter and we'll see what happens after that. Elias nodded slowly. I can do that. And one more thing. Clara took a deep breath. If I'm going to stay here, if I'm going to help raise your daughter and run your household, then I need you to treat me like I matter. Like my opinion counts for something. I'm not asking to make all the decisions, but I'm not going to be shut out of them either. For a long moment, Elias just looked at her. Then to Clara's surprise, he held out his hand across the table. Deal, he said. Clara took his hand. His grip was firm and calloused, warm despite the cold morning. They shook once, formally, sealing the agreement. The door burst open and Mara tumbled inside, her basket full of eggs. Did you decide? Is she staying? Papa, is she staying? Elias released Clara's hand and turned to his daughter. She's staying through the winter. After that, we'll see. Mara's face split into a grin so wide it seemed to light up the entire room. She set down her basket and threw her arms around Clara's neck, nearly knocking her out of her chair. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I'll do whatever you say, and I'll help with everything, and... Mara. Clara gently disentangled herself from the girl's embrace. Listen to me. This is just for the winter. Do you understand? I'm not promising to stay forever. Some of the light dimmed in Mara's eyes, but she nodded. But you're staying now. That's what matters. And maybe by spring you'll want to stay longer. Maybe, Clara said, though she tried to keep her tone neutral. But no promises. No promises? Mara repeated. Then she grinned again. But that means there's a chance, right? If you're not promising to leave, that means there's a chance you'll stay. Clara looked at Elias helplessly, but he just shrugged, a hint of amusement in his eyes. She's not wrong, he said. That's exactly what it means. You're not helping. Wasn't trying to. He stood up and carried his cup to the wash basin. I've got work to do. Fences need mending before the next storm hits. Mara, you help Clara get settled. Show her where everything is. Help her understand how we do things around here. I will. Come on, Clara. I'll show you everything. The hen house and the root cellar and the barn and... Maybe start with the inside of the house, Elias suggested dryly. It's freezing out there, and Clara's still recovering. Oh, right. Mara grabbed Clara's hand. Come on, I'll show you where we keep everything. And I'll tell you about all the chores and what Papa likes for dinner and how he takes his coffee and... Clara let herself be pulled to her feet, Mara chattering a mile a minute. As they moved into the other room, Clara glanced back at Elias. He was standing at the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard, his expression unreadable. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he regretted his offer, whether he was already regretting letting a stranger into his home, into his daughter's life. But then he turned and caught her looking, and something softened in his face. He nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and Clara found herself nodding back. It wasn't much. It wasn't a promise or a declaration, but it was a beginning, and for now, that would have to be enough. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Mara took her job as guide very seriously, showing Clara every corner of the house and explaining how everything worked with the kind of detail that only a child could muster. The root cellar was here stocked with potatoes and carrots and turnips. The woodpile was there, and you had to make sure to bring in enough each night to keep the fire going. The hen house had 6 chickens. Mara had named them all, and they usually laid 4 or 5 eggs a day. The barn had 2 horses, 3 cows, and a goat that Mara swore was the most stubborn animal in Wyoming. Papa says she's got more opinions than sense, Mara explained seriously. But I think she's just particular. She doesn't like men much. Maybe she'll like you better. Clara found herself charmed despite herself. Mara was bright and earnest and so hungry for attention that it made Clara's heart ache. How long had this child been essentially raising herself while her father worked himself to exhaustion? By midday, Clara was exhausted again. Her body wasn't ready for this much activity after 3 days of exposure and near starvation. Mara noticed immediately. You're pale. Papa said you have to rest when you get tired. Come on, you should lie down. I'm fine. Just need a moment. You're not fine, you're wobbling. Mara took Clara's arm with surprising firmness. Papa said I'm in charge of making sure you rest, and that means I'm in charge. So come on. Clara let herself be led back to the bedroom and tucked into bed like a child. Mara pulled the blankets up to her chin and then sat down on the edge of the mattress, her small face serious. Can I ask you something? Mara said. Of course. Why did you answer the letter, the one I wrote? She twisted her fingers together nervously. I mean, you must have had other choices. You're pretty, and you seem nice, and you know how to do things. You could have married someone closer to where you lived. Why come all the way out here to Wyoming? Clara was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. She could give Mara a sanitized version of the truth, something comfortable and easy to digest. But she'd promised Elias she would be honest, and that had to extend to his daughter too. I answered the letter because I was desperate, Clara said finally. I was living in Boston, working in a textile mill. Do you know what that is? Mara shook her head. It's a factory where they make cloth. Big machines that are very loud and very dangerous. The air is full of cotton dust that gets in your lungs and makes you sick. The work is hard and the pay is terrible, and the men who run the place treat the workers like we're not even human. Clara stared at the ceiling, remembering. I'd been there for 3 years. Every day I'd go to work and I'd think, this is killing me. Slowly but surely, this place is killing me. But I didn't have anywhere else to go. No family. No skills beyond what I'd learned in service. No way out. That sounds awful, Mara whispered. It was. And then one day I was walking home from the mill, and I passed a shop that sold newspapers and magazines. There was one in the window, a matrimonial periodical, I'd seen them before but never paid attention. This time, though, I stopped and looked. And I thought, what if that's my way out? What if somewhere in there is a man who needs a wife and doesn't care that I'm nobody special? You are special, Mara said fiercely. Clara smiled. That's kind of you to say. But the point is, I bought the magazine and I looked through all the advertisements. There were dozens of them. Men from all over the country, looking for wives. Some of them sounded cruel. Some of them sounded desperate in ways that frightened me. But the letter I thought was from your father. She paused. It sounded kind. It sounded like someone who needed help but wasn't trying to own someone. So I wrote back. And when the response came saying, yes, come to Wyoming, I sold everything I owned and bought a train ticket. You gave up everything to come here. I did. Because staying where I was felt like dying slowly. Coming here felt like a chance to live. Clara looked at Mara seriously. That's why I was so angry when I realized the letter was a trick. Not because I was angry at you, but because I thought I'd lost my only chance at something better. Mara's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think about what it would mean to you. I just thought about what I wanted. I know. That's what children do. They think about themselves first. That's normal. But now you know better, right? Now you understand that your actions affect other people. I do. I promise I do. Mara wiped her eyes. Is that why you decided to stay? Because you still need a way out? It was a perceptive question, more so than Clara would have expected from a 7-year-old. She considered lying, but honesty had served her well so far. Partly, she admitted, but also because I like you, and because I think your father is a good man who's trying his best in a hard situation, and because... She hesitated. Because I'm tired of running. I'm tired of survival being the only thing I do. I want to live, Mara, really live. And maybe this house, this family, maybe this is where I can figure out how to do that. Mara threw herself forward, hugging Clara tightly. I'll help you. I'll help you figure out how to live. And you can help me and Papa too. We can all help each other. That's the idea, Clara said softly, stroking the girl's hair. They stayed like that for a long moment until Clara's eyes started to drift closed. Mara pulled back and tucked the blankets around her again. Sleep now, she said, sounding so much like a little mother that Clara had to smile. I'll wake you when dinner's ready. Clara slept dreamlessly, and when she woke it was to the sound of Elias and Mara talking quietly in the main room. She lay still for a moment, listening. She's nice, Papa, really nice, and she tells the truth. I like that. I'm glad. Elias's voice was warm when he spoke to his daughter, Clara noticed, completely different from the careful neutrality he used with her. But remember what we talked about. She's staying for the winter. That doesn't mean forever. I know, but it's a start, isn't it? It's a start, Elias agreed. Now, set the table. We're having stew tonight. Clara got up and dressed, then joined them in the main room. Elias glanced up from the pot he was stirring, and something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or something else she couldn't quite identify. Good timing, he said. Food's almost ready. They ate together. The three of them crowded around the small table. The stew was hearty and filling, thick with meat and vegetables. Mara kept up a steady stream of chatter, telling her father about everything she'd shown Clara that day. Elias listened patiently, occasionally asking questions or offering corrections. Clara watched them together and felt something shift in her chest. This was a family, however broken, a father and daughter doing their best to take care of each other. And for the next few months, she would be part of it. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in years. After dinner, Mara helped Clara wash the dishes while Elias tended the fire. Then Mara announced it was time for bed, kissed her father goodnight, and surprised Clara by kissing her cheek too before disappearing into her small bedroom. Clara and Elias were left alone in the firelight. She's a good child, Clara said quietly. She is. Gets lonely out here, though. Not many other kids around. Elias poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. That's part of why she did what she did, I think. Desperation. I understand desperation. I know you do. He set down the poker and turned to face her. Thank you for agreeing to stay, for being kind to her, for all of it. You don't need to thank me. We made a deal. You're giving me room and board and wages. I'm giving you help with the house and with Mara. It's fair. It's more than fair. You could have left. Could have demanded I pay for your passage back east and washed your hands of us. Instead, you're staying in a place you never meant to be, with people you never meant to meet. He paused. That takes courage. Clara felt heat creep into her cheeks. Or stupidity. No, courage. His pale blue eyes were steady on hers. You're braver than you think, Clara Wynne. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and said goodnight, retreating to her room before the conversation could go anywhere more complicated. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling and listening to the wind howl around the eaves, she thought about what he'd said. Brave. No one had ever called her that before. She'd been called stubborn, proud, difficult, but never brave. Maybe he was right. Maybe it took courage to stay in a place where you weren't quite wanted, to try to build something from nothing, to risk your heart one more time after it had been broken so many ways. Or maybe it was just desperation dressed up in prettier words. Either way, she was here now, and she would make the best of it. That was the only choice she had left. The first week passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Clara woke each morning to the sound of Elias stoking the fire, dressed in the dim pre-dawn light, and joined him in the kitchen where they worked in companionable silence preparing breakfast. He was teaching her how he liked things done, not in a controlling way, but in the manner of someone sharing knowledge about a life she was now part of. The coffee needed to be strong enough to stand a spoon in. The biscuits had to be rolled thin or they'd be too heavy. The bacon should be crispy, not chewy. In turn, Clara showed him small improvements she'd learned in her years of service. How to make the fire burn hotter with less wood. How to organize the pantry so nothing got forgotten and wasted. How to mend clothes so the patches were nearly invisible. They didn't talk much during these early morning hours. Words seemed unnecessary, even intrusive, but there was a comfort in the shared work, in the knowledge that neither of them was facing the day alone anymore. Mara was a different story. The child was a constant stream of energy and questions, following Clara from room to room like a devoted shadow. She wanted to help with everything, washing clothes, churning butter, feeding the chickens, kneading bread. Half the time her help made tasks take twice as long, but Clara found she didn't mind. There was something healing about the girl's eager affection, about the way she looked at Clara like she hung the moon. "Can you teach me how to braid hair like yours?" Mara asked one morning as Clara was pinning up her own hair. "Mama used to do mine in braids, but Papa doesn't know how. He just ties it back with a ribbon." Clara's hands stilled. This was the first time Mara had mentioned her mother directly. "I'd be happy to teach you. Come here." Mara climbed onto the chair, sitting very still while Clara gently brushed out her dark hair. It was soft and fine, the same color as Elias's. Clara divided it into sections and began to plait, her fingers working automatically while Mara chattered about the chickens and whether they could get a cat to keep the mice out of the grain stores. "Your hair is beautiful," Clara said softly. "Your mother must have loved brushing it." "She did. Every night before bed, she'd brush it 100 strokes and sing to me." Mara's voice went quiet. "I can't remember all the songs anymore, just pieces of them. That makes me sad." Clara's throat tightened. "What was she like? Your mother?" "She was warm. That's what I remember most. She was always warm, even in winter, and she smelled like bread and roses. And when she laughed, it sounded like bells." Mara twisted around to look at Clara. "Do you think she'd be mad at me for writing that letter and tricking Papa?" "I think she'd understand," Clara said carefully. "I think she'd see that you were lonely and hurting, and she'd want you to be happy." "Do you think she'd like you?" The question caught Clara off guard. She finished the second braid and tied it off with a ribbon before answering. "I don't know. I hope so. I think she would. Papa says Mama liked people who worked hard and spoke their mind and didn't give up easy. That's you." Mara hopped off the chair and examined her braids in the small mirror on the wall. "Perfect. Can you teach me how to do this myself?" "It takes practice, but yes. We'll work on it every day until you get it." Mara threw her arms around Clara's waist. "You're the best. I'm so glad you came here." Clara hugged her back, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." But not everything was easy. There were moments when Clara felt like an intruder, when she'd walk into a room and Elias would stop talking mid-sentence, or when she'd suggest a change to the routine and see resistance flash across his face. The house still belonged to his wife in many ways. Her recipes were the ones they cooked from. Her clothes were the ones Clara wore. Her absence was a presence they all felt, but no one acknowledged. 2 weeks into her stay, Clara was going through the linens and found a trunk in the back of the storage closet. Inside were more of the wife's things: dresses, shawls, a sewing basket, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a wedding dress of white muslin with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She was holding it up to the light, admiring the fine stitching, when Elias walked in. He stopped dead in the doorway. The color drained from his face. "What are you doing?" His voice was so sharp that Clara nearly dropped the dress. "I was organizing the linens. I found this trunk and I thought, you thought you'd go through my wife's things?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the dress from her hands, his movements jerky and rough. "These are private. You had no right." Clara felt her own temper flare. "I wasn't prying. I was trying to organize the house like you asked me to. How was I supposed to know which trunks were off limits when you never told me?" "You should have asked." "About every single item in this house? Every drawer and closet and trunk? Should I ask permission to breathe too, or is that allowed without consultation?" They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Elias's jaw was clenched so tight Clara could see the muscle jumping. His hands were white-knuckled around the wedding dress. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally, forcing her voice to soften. "I should have been more careful. I wasn't trying to invade her memory or disrespect her. I was just trying to help." Some of the tension went out of Elias's shoulders. He looked down at the dress in his hands, and his expression crumpled for just a moment before he got it under control again. "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you like that. It's just—" He trailed off, carefully refolding the dress and placing it back in the trunk. "It's been 2 years, and sometimes it still feels like yesterday. I'll be going about my day, feeling almost normal, and then I'll see something of hers or smell something that reminds me of her, and it all comes crashing back." "You loved her very much." "I did. She was everything good in my life. When she died, it felt like all the light went out of the world." He closed the trunk and sat down on it, his hands dangling between his knees. "I know I need to let go. I know I need to move forward, but I don't know how. And having you here, wearing her clothes, sleeping in her bed, doing the things she used to do, it helps and it hurts at the same time." Clara lowered herself to sit beside him, careful to leave space between them. "I can't replace her. I wouldn't want to even if I could, but I can be here. I can help you and Mara build something new, not instead of what you had, but alongside it." "Is that possible? To build something new without forgetting what came before?" "I think it has to be. Otherwise, we'd all be trapped by our pasts forever." Clara thought about her own history, the orphanage, the years in service, the mill. "I've spent my whole life trying to run away from where I came from, but maybe that's not the answer. Maybe the answer is to carry it with you while you move forward, to let it be part of your story without letting it be the whole story." Elias looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're wise for someone so young." "I'm not that young. 26 is plenty old enough to have learned a few hard lessons." 26? He shook his head. "Sarah was 24 when she died. You're about the same age she was." Clara didn't know what to say to that. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people learning to exist in the same space, learning the shape and weight of each other's grief. Finally, Elias stood up. "The trunk can stay here. You don't need to move it or hide it, but maybe just leave the things inside where they are. For now." "Of course." He nodded and left the room. Clara stayed where she was for a long moment, staring at the closed trunk. She understood his pain. How could she not? But she also understood that she couldn't live in a house haunted by a ghost, couldn't spend the next 4 months walking on eggshells around a woman who'd been gone for 2 years. Something would have to give. She just didn't know what yet. The tension from that day lingered for the next few days, making the house feel smaller and more oppressive. Elias threw himself into his work with even more intensity, leaving before dawn and not returning until after dark. He ate his meals in silence and retreated to his room as soon as he was done. Mara noticed the change and grew quiet herself, watching her father with worried eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked Clara one evening while they were washing dishes. "Is Papa angry at me again?" "He's not angry at you, sweetheart. He's just working through some difficult feelings." "About Mama?" Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Yes, about your Mama and about me being here. It's complicated for him." "Is he going to make you leave?" "No, we made a deal, remember? I'm staying through the winter." "But what if he changes his mind?" Mara's voice was small and frightened. "What if he decides it's too hard having you here and asks you to go?" Clara dried her hands and crouched down so she was eye level with the girl. "Listen to me. Your father is a good man who keeps his word. He said I could stay through the winter, and he meant it. He's just adjusting, that's all. We all are. But we'll figure it out. Promise?" "I promise." But that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Clara wasn't sure she could keep that promise. She'd thought coming here would be hard, but she hadn't anticipated this particular kind of difficulty. Being a living reminder of everything Elias had lost, existing in a space that still belonged to another woman. How could she make a home here when the real mistress of the house was a memory that refused to fade? The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Dallow arrived the next afternoon with a basket of supplies and a no-nonsense expression. She took one look at the strained atmosphere in the house and immediately took charge. "Elias Turner, you get yourself in here right now," she called out the kitchen window to where Elias was chopping wood. He came inside, looking wary. "Mrs. Dallow, is something wrong?" "Yes, something is wrong. This house feels like a funeral parlor, and I won't have it." She set her basket on the table with a thump. "You're making that poor girl feel like an intruder in her own home, and it stops now." "I'm not—" "Don't you dare argue with me. I've known you since you were in short pants, boy, and I know when you're being stubborn." She turned to Clara. "And you, stop tiptoeing around like you're afraid to disturb the dead. Sarah was my friend, and I loved her dearly, but she's gone. She'd be the first one to tell you to make this house your own." Clara felt her eyes burn. "I don't want to erase her." "You're not erasing her, you're living. There's a difference." Mrs. Dallow pulled things out of her basket: fabric, thread, a packet of seeds. "Sarah made this house a home because she put her mark on it. She planted herbs in the garden. She sewed curtains for the windows. She chose where each piece of furniture would go. And do you know why she did all that?" "Why?" Clara whispered. "Because this was her home, and she wanted it to feel that way. Not like she was living in someone else's space, but like it was hers." Mrs. Dallow fixed Elias with a stern look. "Sarah wouldn't want this house to be a shrine. She'd want it to be lived in, laughed in, changed, and grown into something new. And if you can't see that, then you didn't know your wife as well as you thought you did." Elias flinched like he'd been struck. "That's not fair. Life's not fair. Death's not fair. But wallowing in grief for 2 years while your daughter grows up without joy and this house falls apart around you. That's not fair either. Not to Mara, not to yourself, and certainly not to Clara, who's trying her best in an impossible situation." Mrs. Dallow's voice softened. "I know you're hurting, but you've got to let yourself heal, and you've got to let this house heal too." She left shortly after, pressing the seeds into Clara's hand with a whispered, "Plant these in the spring, rosemary and lavender. They'll make the place smell like hope." After she'd gone, Clara and Elias stood in the kitchen, not looking at each other. Mara had disappeared into her room, sensing the need for adult conversation. "She's right," Elias said finally. "I've been unfair to you. You've been grieving. That's not an excuse, not anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in dark spikes. "I don't know how to do this, Clara. I don't know how to move forward without feeling like I'm betraying Sarah's memory." "Maybe you start small," Clara suggested. "Maybe you just let me hang new curtains in the kitchen, or rearrange the pantry, small things that make this feel like a home we're building together, instead of a museum to what used to be." "New curtains?" Elias actually smiled, just a little. "That's your big ask? New curtains? I'm starting small, Give me time and I'll work my way up to rearranging the furniture. God help me. But he was still almost smiling, and the tension that had gripped the house for days was finally starting to ease. All right, new curtains, and you can rearrange whatever you want in the pantry. Just maybe leave the bedroom alone for now. I'm not ready for that. Fair enough? They shook on it, and this time when their hands met, something passed between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. They were both broken people trying to build something whole. That had to count for something. Over the next 2 weeks, small changes began to appear in the house. Clara sewed new curtains from fabric Mrs. Dallow had brought, cheerful yellow instead of the dark brown that had been there before. She reorganized the kitchen so things were easier to reach. She planted herbs in pots on the windowsill so they'd have fresh rosemary and thyme even in winter. She found an old rag rug in the storage closet, cleaned it up, and put it by the front door. None of the changes were dramatic, but together they began to shift the feel of the house from a place trapped in the past to a place that was learning to live again. Mara noticed immediately. It feels lighter in here, she said one morning, spinning in a circle in the kitchen. Like the sun's brighter or something. That's because Clara opened the curtains, Elias said, but he was smiling. And because she bullied me into whitewashing that wall. I didn't bully you, I strongly suggested. Same thing. They were learning to joke with each other, Clara realized. Learning to exist in the same space without tiptoeing around each other's wounds. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still times when grief would rise up and choke the easy conversation. But it was progress. The real turning point came 3 weeks into Clara's stay when Mara came down with a fever. It started as a cough, dry and harsh, that kept the girl up half the night. By morning, she was burning up, her cheeks flushed and her eyes glassy with fever. Clara felt her forehead and exchanged a worried glance with Elias. How high do you think? He asked quietly. High enough to be concerning. We should send for the doctor. The roads are snowed in. Won't be able to get through for at least a day, maybe 2. Elias's face was tight with worry. What do we do? Clara had nursed sick children before, back in her service days. She knew what to do, even if the knowledge came with a heavy weight of responsibility. We keep her cool, wet cloths on her forehead and wrists, make her drink as much water as she'll take. And we watch her. If the fever doesn't break in 24 hours, you ride for the doctor no matter how bad the roads are. And if it gets worse before then you ride anyway. They fell into a routine, taking turns sitting with Mara. Clara would sponge the girl's face and neck with cool water, while Elias prepared broths and teas. When Clara needed to rest, Elias would take over, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he coaxed medicine into his daughter's mouth. The night was the worst. Mara's fever spiked and she became delirious, calling for her mother in a weak, thready voice that broke Clara's heart. Mama, Mama, where are you? I'm cold, Mama. Come back. Clara held her close, rocking her and singing softly, lullabies she remembered from her own childhood in the orphanage, songs the older girls had sung to comfort the younger ones. Across the room, Elias sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. She's going to be all right, Clara said firmly. Do you hear me, Elias? She's going to be fine. You can't promise that. I can and I will. She's strong. She's a fighter. And we're not going to let her go. Clara kept rocking Mara, kept singing, even though her voice was getting hoarse. She's going to be fine. Whether it was the nursing or the prayers or simple luck, by dawn the fever had broken. Mara woke weak but clear-eyed, asking for water in a scratchy voice. Elias broke down completely, pulling his daughter into his arms and sobbing into her hair. I thought I was losing you. I thought, I'm okay, Papa. I'm okay. Mara patted his back awkwardly, looking confused by the intensity of his emotion. Don't cry. Clara took good care of me. Elias looked over Mara's head at Clara, and the expression on his face was raw and unguarded. Thank you, he mouthed. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She felt wrung out, exhausted beyond measure, but also strangely exhilarated. They'd done it. Together, they'd gotten Mara through the worst of it. Later that day, after Mara had fallen into a natural, healing sleep, Elias found Clara in the kitchen. She was scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, trying to work off the nervous energy that still thrummed through her body. Clara. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, looking exhausted and emotional and more human than she'd ever seen him. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me get it all out before you respond. Can you do that?" Clara set down the dish and dried her hands. "All right. When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. I thought I'd used up my chance at happiness, at family, at any kind of softness in my life. I figured I'd just work the ranch and raise Mara the best I could, and that would be enough. It had to be enough, because I couldn't imagine anything else." He took a step closer. "But then you showed up, half frozen and proud as the devil, and you turned everything upside down. You made me see how much I'd let this place fall apart, how much I'd been failing Mara, how much I'd been failing myself." "Elias, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "These past 3 weeks, watching you make this house into a home again, watching Mara come back to life, watching myself start to remember what it feels like to be something more than just tired. It's been terrifying. Because it means I have something to lose again. And last night, when Mara was sick and when I was afraid," his voice cracked. "I realized that I'm not just afraid of losing her. I'm afraid of losing you too. And I don't know what to do with that." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this arrangement we have, you staying through the winter as help, it's not enough. It's not honest. Because you're not just help to me anymore. He struggled for words. "You're part of this family, part of this home. And I don't want you to leave in the spring. I want you to stay." "As what?" Clara whispered. "As whatever you want to be. As a member of this household, as someone who matters, as—" He stopped, seeming to realize what he was about to say, and took a breath. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. We barely know each other, and neither of us is ready for that. But I'm asking you to consider staying past the winter, to give us a chance to see what this could become." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't owe me this. You don't owe me anything because I helped nurse your daughter. This isn't about owing. This is about wanting, about seeing something good and being brave enough to reach for it before it slips away." He took another step closer. "You said once that you came here looking for a place to belong. Well, you belong here. With us. If you want to." "I want to," Clara breathed. "God help me, I want to so much." "Then stay. Not because of a deal or an obligation. Stay because this is where you want to be." Clara didn't let herself think, didn't let herself calculate the risks or count the ways this could go wrong. She just closed the distance between them and hugged him, a brief, fierce embrace that said everything words couldn't. When she pulled back, they were both crying. "I'll stay," she said, "for as long as you'll have me." "That might be a very long time." "Good." They stood there in the kitchen, the winter light streaming through the new yellow curtains, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, the house felt like what it was meant to be, a home. Over the next several weeks, something shifted between the three of them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Clara felt it in every shared meal, every quiet evening by the fire, every moment of domestic routine that had transformed from obligation into something that felt almost like choice. Mara recovered fully from her illness, though she milked the attention for all it was worth, insisting that Clara read to her every night before bed and that her father make her special treats to help her regain her strength. Neither adult had the heart to refuse her, though Elias did put his foot down when she suggested she needed a pony to aid in her recovery. "Nice try," he told his daughter, "but you're getting oatmeal in gratitude, not livestock." "It was worth a shot," Mara said, grinning. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in years. There was a lightness growing in the house, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. She caught herself humming while she worked, smiling at nothing, feeling the kind of bone-deep contentment she'd always assumed was reserved for other people, people who hadn't been abandoned and used and disappointed. But contentment, she was learning, was fragile. It could be shattered in an instant by words spoken without thinking or by truths too long ignored. The breaking point came on a bitter cold night in late February. They'd finished dinner and Mara had gone to bed, leaving Clara and Elias alone by the fire. Clara was mending one of his shirts, and he was oiling his boots, and the silence between them was comfortable until it suddenly wasn't. Can I ask you something? Elias said suddenly. Clara looked up from her stitching. Of course. Why haven't you ever asked me about money? About the wages I promised you? He set down the boot and looked at her directly. It's been over a month, and you haven't mentioned it once. Clara felt her cheeks heat. The truth was, she'd forgotten about the arrangement, had stopped thinking of herself as hired help, and started thinking of herself as part of the household. But saying that out loud felt too vulnerable, too revealing. I assumed you'd bring it up when you were ready, she said carefully. That's not an answer. What do you want me to say, Elias? I want you to tell me the truth. Do you still think of this as a job? As something temporary you're doing for wages? Or has it become something else? Clara set down her mending, her heart racing. What do you want it to be? I asked you first. They stared at each other across the firelight, and Clara felt the weight of all the things they'd left unsaid pressing down on her chest. This was it. The moment where they either pushed forward or fell back into the safe distance of their original arrangement. It's not a job anymore, she said quietly. It hasn't been for weeks. I'm not staying here for money or room and board. I'm staying here because this is where I want to be. Because you and Mara, you've become my family, the only real family I've ever had. Elias let out a breath. Good. That's good. Because I don't think of you as hired help. I haven't for a long time. Then what am I? You're the woman who saved my daughter's life, who made my house feel like a home again. Who made me remember what it's like to want something beyond just survival. He stood up and crossed to where she sat, kneeling down so they were at eye level. You're the woman I think about first thing every morning and last thing every night. The woman I catch myself watching when I think you're not looking, trying to figure out how I got this lucky. Clara's breath caught. Elias, I know it's too soon. I know we agreed to take this slow and see what happens, but I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see someone temporary. I see someone permanent, someone who belongs here as much as I do, maybe more. You can't mean that. Why not? Because you barely know me. Because I'm wearing your dead wife's clothes and sleeping in her bed and trying to fill a space that isn't mine to fill. Because this whole thing started with a lie and… Stop. He took her hands in his. Listen to me. Yes, this started in the strangest possible way. Yes, there are complications and grief and 100 reasons why this shouldn't work. But it is working. You can't deny that. I'm not denying anything. I'm just trying to be realistic. Realistic? You traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger because you were desperate for a better life. You nearly froze to death on a train platform because you refused to give up on a promise. You stayed in a house where you weren't wanted because you were too proud to accept charity. Nothing about you has ever been realistic, Clara. You're the most stubborn, determined, fierce person I've ever met, so don't start being practical now. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. What do you want from me? I want you to admit that you feel this too, this thing between us. Whatever it is, friendship or gratitude or something more. I want you to stop pretending you're just here temporarily, just passing through. I want you to claim this life like it's yours, because it is yours if you want it. And if I'm afraid? The words came out as barely a whisper. What if I'm terrified that I'll do something wrong and ruin this? What if I'm not good enough to be what you and Mara need? Then we'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes and fix them. We'll have bad days and good days. We'll be a family, messy and imperfect and real. He squeezed her hands. But you have to choose it, Clara. You have to decide that you're staying not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you want to be. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw everything she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. She saw a good man who'd been broken by loss and was trying to piece himself back together. She saw a father who loved his daughter more than anything. She saw someone who was offering her not charity or obligation, but partnership, belonging, home. I choose this, she whispered. I choose you and Mara and this life. Not because it's my only option, but because it's what I want. What I've always wanted, even before I knew what to call it. Elias's face broke into a smile so bright it transformed him. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself be held, let herself feel safe for the first time in her memory. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the firelight, while outside the wind howled and the snow fell and the world turned cold and dark. But inside, in this house that had learned to be warm again, Clara finally understood what it meant to come home. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of brilliant winter day where the sun glinted off the snow so brightly it hurt to look at. Clara woke early, as had become her habit, but instead of finding Elias already up and tending the fire, she found him still asleep in the chair by the hearth, where he must have dozed off after their conversation. His head was tilted at an uncomfortable angle, and there was a peaceful expression on his face that made him look younger, less careworn. She stood watching him for a moment, allowing herself the luxury of really looking at him without worrying about being caught. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened. She could see traces of the young man he must have been before grief and responsibility carved away everything except the essential core of him. There was gray threading through his dark hair at the temples, and the scar on his forehead looked stark in the morning light. His hands, even in rest, bore the calluses and scars of a life spent working the land. These were good hands, Clara thought. Hands that had held his dying wife, that had raised his daughter alone, that had carried a half-frozen stranger through a blizzard and nursed her back to health. Hands that had touched Clara's face with a gentleness she hadn't known she was starving for. She must have made some small sound because his eyes opened suddenly, fixing on her with an alertness that suggested he was used to waking quickly, ready for whatever emergency the day might bring. "Clara." His voice was rough with sleep. He sat up straighter, wincing as his neck protested the awkward position. "What time is it?" "Early still. You should go to bed properly. Get a few more hours of real sleep." "Can't. Too much to do." But he didn't move, just sat there looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Last night wasn't a dream, was it? You really said you'd stay." "I really said I'd stay." "Good." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Good. I was half afraid I'd imagined the whole thing." Before Clara could respond, they heard Mara's door creak open and the patter of small feet. The girl appeared in the doorway, her hair a wild tangle and her nightgown twisted around her thin frame. "Papa? Clara? Are you both awake already?" She rubbed her eyes sleepily. "I heard voices and thought maybe something was wrong." "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart." Elias held out his arm, and Mara came to him immediately, climbing into his lap like she was still a much smaller child. "We were just talking." "About what?" Clara and Elias exchanged a glance. They hadn't discussed how to tell Mara about this shift in their relationship, if they should tell her at all, or just let her realize it gradually. "About spring," Clara said, making the decision in the moment. "About how when the snow melts, we'll plant a garden. Vegetables and herbs and maybe some flowers." "Really?" Mara perked up. "Can we plant roses? Mama used to love roses." "We can plant whatever you want," Clara said softly. "We'll make it beautiful." "And you'll be here to see them bloom?" Mara's voice was suddenly small, uncertain. "You're not leaving when winter ends?" Elias tightened his arm around his daughter. "Clara's staying, saying Mara, for as long as she wants. This is her home now." Mara's face lit up like someone had struck a match inside her. She scrambled off her father's lap and launched herself at Clara, wrapping her thin arms around Clara's waist so tightly it almost hurt. "Really? You promise? You're really staying?" Clara knelt down and held the girl properly, feeling the fierce desperation in her grip. "I promise. I'm not going anywhere." "Because you want to stay? Not because you have to?" "Because I want to. Because this is where I belong." Mara pulled back just enough to look Clara in the face, her pale blue eyes, so like her father's, searching for any hint of deception. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she threw her arms around Clara's neck again and burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry I lied and tricked you and made you come here. I know it was wrong, but I'm so glad you came. I'm so glad you're here." "Hush now. It's all right. Everything turned out exactly the way it was supposed to." Clara stroked the girl's tangled hair and met Elias's eyes over her head. He was watching them with an expression that was part gratitude, part wonder, part something deeper that Clara didn't have a name for yet. They spent the rest of that day in a kind of golden contentment, going about their usual tasks but with an undercurrent of joy that made everything feel lighter. Mara was practically vibrating with happiness, chattering non-stop about all the things they would do now that Clara was staying forever. She wanted to learn how to sew better so she could make Clara a dress that was actually Clara's, not a hand-me-down. She wanted to teach Clara how to milk the cows, even though Clara already knew how. She wanted to plan the garden down to every last detail, drawing elaborate maps on scraps of paper that showed where each plant would go. "We'll need tomatoes here, where they'll get the most sun, and the beans can climb up poles, Papa can make those, and the carrots and potatoes can go in the back because they don't need as much light. And we absolutely must have pumpkins for pie in the fall, and—" "Breathe, little one," Elias said, laughing. "The garden isn't going anywhere. We have months to plan it." But he was as caught up in the planning as Mara was, Clara could tell. There was a lightness to him that hadn't been there before, an ease in the way he moved and spoke. He caught Clara's eye across the room more than once, and each time there was a warmth in his gaze that sent heat flooding through her. It was Mrs. Dallow who brought them back down to earth. She arrived 3 days later with her usual basket of supplies and her sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at the three of them, at the way Mara hovered close to Clara, at the way Elias's gaze kept drifting to Clara when he thought no one was watching, at the general atmosphere of tentative happiness that filled the house, and nodded approvingly. "Well," she said, setting her basket on the table with a thump, "I see things have progressed nicely in my absence." "Mrs. Dallow," Elias had the grace to look embarrassed. "We were going to tell you." "Tell me what?" "That you finally come to your senses and realized what a treasure fell into your lap. I should hope you were going to tell me. I'd like to take some credit for it, considering I'm the one who knocked sense into both your stubborn heads." Clara felt herself blushing. "We're taking things slow. We're just figuring things out." "Taking things slow. That's what you're calling it?" Mrs. Dallow's eyes twinkled. "Child, I've known Elias since he was in short pants, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even Sarah, God rest her soul. And I say that with no disrespect to the dead." "Mrs. Dallow, that's not—" Elias started. "Don't you Mrs. Dallow me. It's the truth, and you know it. What you had with Sarah was good and real, and it gave you that precious girl over there. But what you're building with Clara is something different. Something that comes from choosing each other with your eyes wide open, knowing all the hard parts, and choosing anyway." She turned to Clara. "And you, girl, don't you dare let fear make you small. You've earned your place here. You've earned the right to be happy." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm trying. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop." "That's because you've never had anything good last." "But good things can last, Clara. You just have to fight for them when they're threatened. And they will be threatened. Life sees to that. But you fight for them anyway." Mrs. Dallow pulled items out of her basket as she spoke. Flour, sugar, a precious jar of honey. "Which brings me to why I'm really here. There's trouble coming." The warmth drained out of the room instantly. Elias straightened, his whole body going tense and alert. "What kind of trouble?" "Word reached me yesterday from town. There's a group of men asking questions about a woman matching Clara's description. They claim she owes them money. They've been showing around a photograph." Clara's blood turned to ice. She gripped the edge of the table to keep herself upright, her mind racing through possibilities. It couldn't be the mill owners. She'd saved enough from her meager wages to pay off her contract before leaving Boston. It couldn't be the boarding house. She'd left that account settled too, which meant it had to be. "Daniel Fletcher," she breathed. "You know these men?" Elias's voice was deadly quiet. Clara couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see whatever expression would cross his face when she told him the truth. "Not men. Man. Daniel Fletcher. He was my landlord in Boston, before the boarding house. And I owed him 3 months back rent when I left. I didn't have the money to pay him. I thought if I could just get away, if I could start over somewhere new, he'd write it off as a loss and move on." She forced herself to look up, to meet Elias's eyes. "I know I should have told you. I know I should have been honest from the start. But I was ashamed and I was scared and I hoped that my past wouldn't follow me here." "How much do you owe him?" Elias's voice was carefully neutral. $43. He flinched slightly at the amount, and Clara's heart sank. $43 was a small fortune, especially in winter when money was tight and work was scarce. "That's a considerable sum," he said finally. "Why didn't you pay him before you left?" "Because I couldn't. Because I was working 16-hour days at the mill and barely making enough to eat, let alone save. Fletcher kept raising the rent, kept finding reasons to charge me extra fees. By the time I realized I needed to get out, I was so far behind I'd never catch up." Clara's voice cracked. "So I ran. I answered your daughter's letter because it was the only way I could see to escape. And I didn't tell you because I was afraid if you knew the truth, that I was a woman who couldn't pay her debts, who ran away from her obligations, you'd never let me stay." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mara had gone very still, her eyes wide and frightened as she looked between the adults. Mrs. Dallow stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Finally, Elias spoke. "This man Fletcher, what kind of man is he?" "Dangerous," Clara whispered. "He's not going to just ask nicely for his money. He's going to want to make an example of me. Show everyone what happens when you try to cheat him." "You didn't cheat him. You just couldn't pay." "That won't matter to him. All that matters is that I left without settling my accounts, and now he's tracked me down." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire crackling in the hearth. "I should leave. I should go before he gets here, before he can cause trouble for you and Mara. If I'm not here, maybe he'll just move on." "Like hell you will." Elias's voice was hard as iron. "You're not running. Not from him, not from this. We'll face him together." "Elias, you don't understand. Fletcher isn't just some angry landlord. He's connected. He has men who do his dirty work for him. If he's come all the way to Wyoming, it's not just about the money. It's about pride, about making sure everyone knows you don't cross him." "Then we'll deal with it. But you're not leaving." He crossed to her and took her shoulders in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Do you hear me? You're not running anymore. You're done running. But the money, I'll pay him. Whatever you owe, I'll pay it." "No." Clara pulled away from him, shaking her head violently. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you do that. I won't let you bankrupt yourself for my mistakes." "It's not bankruptcy. It's $43. I have it. Barely, but I have it." "Elias, that's probably every cent you have saved. That's your emergency fund, your cushion for when things go wrong. You can't just give it away because I was too proud to tell you the truth." "I'm not giving it away. I'm investing it. In you. In us. In this family we're building." His jaw was set in that stubborn way Clara had come to recognize. "You said you chose this life. You said you chose us. Well, I'm choosing you right back, and that means protecting you from men like Fletcher. That means standing between you and anyone who wants to hurt you. Even if it costs you everything? Even then. But it won't cost me everything. It'll cost me some money, which I can earn back. If I let you run, if I let you go back out into that cold alone because I was too cheap or too afraid to help you, that would cost me everything. That would cost me you." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could handle this on her own, that she didn't need protecting. But the truth was, she was terrified. Fletcher had always been cruel in small, calculated ways. She didn't know what he would do now that he'd tracked her across the country. "What if paying him isn't enough?" she asked quietly. "What if he wants more?" "Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Elias pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Over his shoulder, Clara could see Mara watching with frightened eyes, and Mrs. Dallow with an expression of grim determination. "When is he likely to arrive?" Elias asked Mrs. Dallow. "Could be any day now. The roads are clearing as the weather warms. I'd say you have a week at most, maybe less. Then we prepare. We make sure this house is secure, we make sure Mara is safe, and we wait." The week that followed was the longest of Clara's life. Every sound made her jump. Every time she looked out the window, she expected to see riders approaching. The easy happiness that had filled the house evaporated, replaced by a tension that made it hard to breathe. Elias threw himself into preparations with a single-minded intensity that was both comforting and terrifying. He cleaned and oiled his rifle, checked the locks on all the doors and windows, and instructed Mara on what to do if strangers came to the house. He barely slept, spending his nights watching from the front window, his rifle across his knees. Clara tried to go about her normal routines, but everything felt hollow. She cooked meals no one had appetite for. She mended clothes with hands that shook. She read to Mara at night, but the words felt thick and clumsy in her mouth, and she could see the fear in the girl's eyes, even as she pretended everything was normal. On the 5th day, Mrs. Dallow arrived with news. "He's here. Rode into town yesterday with 2 men. They've been asking around showing that photograph. Someone told them where you are." "How long do we have?" Elias asked. "Hours, maybe. Certainly no more than a day." Clara felt her knees go weak. This was it. This was the moment where everything she'd built came crashing down around her. "Mara," Elias said quietly, "I need you to go to Mrs. Dallow's house and stay there until we come get you." "No!" Mara's voice was shrill with panic. "I'm not leaving you and Clara." "You're not leaving us. You're just going somewhere safe for a little while." "But what if something happens? What if—" "Nothing's going to happen." Elias knelt down and took his daughter's face in his hands. "I promise you, nothing bad is going to happen. But I need to know you're safe so I can focus on handling this situation. Can you do that for me? Can you be brave and go with Mrs. Dallow?" Mara's face crumpled, but she nodded. "You promise you'll come get me? Both of you?" "We promise." Clara knelt beside Elias and wrapped her arms around the girl. "This will all be over soon, and then we'll all be together again. Everything will be fine." "You promise?" Mara's voice was muffled against Clara's shoulder. "I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but sometimes lies were kinder than the truth. Mrs. Dallow took Mara away, the girl looking back over her shoulder with eyes too old and frightened for her young face. The moment they were gone, Clara sagged against the wall. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I brought this down on you." "Stop apologizing. This isn't your fault." Elias checked his rifle one more time, then set it carefully beside the door. "Whatever happens, Clara, whatever he says or does, you stay behind me. Understand? You don't engage with him. You don't argue. You just stay quiet and let me handle it." "Elias, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you. This is how it's going to be." Before Clara could respond, they heard it, the sound of horses approaching. 3 of them, from the rhythm of the hoofbeats. They stopped in the yard, and for a moment there was nothing but the creak of leather and the heavy silence of men dismounting. Then came the knock on the door, hard, authoritative, brooking no refusal. Elias looked at Clara one more time. "Stay behind me," he said again. Then he opened the door. The man on the other side was exactly as Clara remembered him, tall and well-dressed, with cold gray eyes and a mouth that curved naturally into a sneer. Daniel Fletcher looked at Elias with barely concealed contempt. Then his gaze slid past him to where Clara stood, and his expression turned predatory. "Well, well, Miss Wynne, you've been a difficult woman to find." "Mr. Fletcher." Clara was proud that her voice didn't shake. "I wasn't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't. Most thieves don't expect to be caught." He looked around the modest cabin with obvious disdain. "This is what you ran away for? This hovel in the middle of nowhere? I must say your taste has declined considerably." "State your business." Elias's voice was hard and flat. "Then leave." Fletcher turned his attention back to Elias, looking him up and down with insulting thoroughness. "You must be the rancher, the one who married my tenant without bothering to check her references or settle her debts first. I hope you got her cheap, because she certainly left Boston owing me a considerable sum." "I know about the debt. I'm prepared to settle it." "Are you now?" Fletcher smiled, and it was the smile of a shark. "That's very gallant of you. Very noble. Unfortunately, the debt has grown since Miss Wynne ran away. There are interest fees, tracking fees, inconvenience fees. All told, I believe she now owes me approximately $200. The number hit like a physical blow. Clara heard herself gasp, heard Elias's sharp intake of breath. $200. It might as well have been 2,000. There was no way Elias had that kind of money, especially not in winter. "That's highway robbery," Elias said coldly. "The original debt was $43. There's no legal precedent for quadrupling a debt like that." "Perhaps not. But then, we're a long way from any courthouse, aren't we? And I have 2 very large gentlemen with me who are quite persuasive when it comes to collecting what's owed." Fletcher's smile widened. Of course, if you can't pay in cash, I'm prepared to accept alternative forms of compensation. Such as? Your land deed, this ranch. I understand it's about 300 acres. That should more than cover what you owe me. I don't owe you anything. Clara does. Ah, but she's your wife, isn't she? That makes her debts your debts under the law. Surely you knew that when you married her. Clara saw Elias hesitate, saw him struggle with whether to tell the truth, that they weren't actually married, that he had no legal obligation to pay anything. If he told the truth, Fletcher might leave him alone, might focus his attention solely on Clara and let Elias walk away clean. She's mine, Elias said finally, which means her debts are mine. But I'm not giving you my land. I'll pay you the original $43 plus reasonable interest, let's say $60 total. That's fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair? Fletcher's voice turned ugly. Your wife stole from me. She broke her lease, damaged my property, and disappeared in the night like a common criminal. And you think $60 is fair compensation for that? I didn't damage anything. Clara couldn't stay silent anymore, despite Elias's warning. I left the room exactly as I found it. You're lying. Careful, Miss Wynne. Or should I say Mrs. Turner? Making accusations against a man of my standing rarely ends well for people like you. Fletcher took a step forward, and immediately Elias moved to block him, his hand dropping to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. That's far enough. Fletcher stopped, but his expression didn't change. Are you threatening me, Mr. Turner? I'm protecting my home. You've stated your demands. I've made my counteroffer. Take it or leave, but either way, this conversation is over. Is it? Fletcher looked past Elias to Clara again. Tell me something, my dear. Does your husband know about the other reason I'm here? Does he know about the real debt you owe? Clara felt ice flood her veins. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Perhaps I should refresh your memory. The watch that went missing from my desk drawer, the silver candlesticks that disappeared from the parlor, the cash box that somehow came up short. I didn't steal anything from you. Clara's voice was shaking now, not with fear but with rage. You're making this up. Am I? Then how do you explain how you afforded that train ticket west? On a mill worker's wages, it should have taken you years to save that kind of money. But you had it in a matter of weeks. Curious, isn't it? Elias looked at Clara, and she saw the question in his eyes. For one terrible moment, she wondered if he actually believed Fletcher's lies, if he was questioning everything he thought he knew about her. I saved every penny I earned for 6 months, Clara said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion inside her. I ate 1 meal a day. I wore the same dress until it was practically rags. I didn't steal anything. Mr. Fletcher is lying because he knows the original debt won't be enough to satisfy his pride. He wants to ruin me for daring to leave him. Very eloquent, Fletcher said with mock admiration. But I have witnesses who will swear they saw you taking items from my property. I have documentation of missing valuables. And I have the resources to pursue this through the courts if necessary, which would be very expensive for your husband and very embarrassing for you. Get out. Elias's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made even Fletcher take a step back. Get off my property, now. I'm not leaving without what I'm owed. You're not owed anything. You're a liar and a cheat, and you're using the law to terrorize a woman who had the courage to escape your exploitation. But she's not alone anymore. She's not defenseless. So I'll say it one more time. Get off my property, or I'll remove you myself. Fletcher's face darkened with fury. You're making a very serious mistake, Mr. Turner. I have powerful friends. I can make your life very difficult. You can try. Elias picked up the rifle, not pointing it at Fletcher, but making his intent clear. But you'll do it from somewhere else. You have 10 seconds to get on your horse. For a long moment, Fletcher just stared at them. Then he smiled that shark smile again and tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. This isn't over, Miss Wynne. I'll be back with the sheriff and a warrant for your arrest. Theft is a serious crime, even out here in the wilderness. I wonder how your new husband will feel about you when you're sitting in a jail cell. He turned and walked back to his horse, his 2 silent companions following. They mounted and rode away, but not before Fletcher looked back one more time, his expression promising retribution. The moment they were out of sight, Clara's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her whole body shaking. Elias set down the rifle and knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. He's lying, she gasped. Everything he said about the stealing, it's all lies. I never took anything from him. I swear it. I know. I believe you. But what if he comes back with the sheriff? What if he's fabricated evidence? What if... Then we'll fight it. We'll get a lawyer. We'll tell the truth. Elias pulled back just enough to look her in the face. Clara, listen to me. I don't care what he says. I don't care what lies he tells. I know who you are. I know what kind of person you are, and I will stand beside you no matter what comes. Even if it costs you everything, your land, your reputation, your freedom, even then, because you're worth it. Because this, he gestured between them, what we're building together, it's worth fighting for. It's worth protecting. Clara buried her face in his chest and wept, great racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded inside her. She cried for the injustice of it all, for the fear and the uncertainty, for the fact that she'd finally found something good only to have it threatened by the ghosts of her past. But underneath the fear and the tears, there was something else, something fierce and bright and unbreakable. She had run from Fletcher once, run from Boston with nothing but desperation driving her, but she wouldn't run again. She had something to fight for now, someone to fight for. She had Elias, and she had Mara, and she had this life they were building together. And she'd be damned if she let Daniel Fletcher take that away from her without a fight. When Clara finally stopped crying, she found herself still wrapped in Elias's arms, her face pressed against his chest where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was that steadiness that gave her the courage to pull herself together, to wipe her eyes and straighten her spine and start thinking clearly again. "We need a plan," she said, her voice hoarse but determined. "Fletcher will be back, probably with the sheriff like he said. We need to be ready." "Agreed." Elias helped her to her feet, his hand steadying her when she swayed slightly. "First thing, we go to town. We talk to the sheriff ourselves before Fletcher can poison him with lies. We tell him the truth, that you owed Fletcher rent, that you left Boston to start over, that Fletcher's fabricated theft charges to extort money from us. What if the sheriff believes him instead of us? Fletcher said he has witnesses, documentation. Even if it's all fake, it might look real enough to convince someone who doesn't know me. Then we'll need our own witnesses, people who can vouch for your character." Elias was already moving, pulling on his coat and boots. "Mrs. Dallow, for one. She's known and respected in this county. And Doc Morrison, he knows you helped nurse Mara through her fever. And the shopkeeper, Miller. You've been to his store enough times that he knows you're honest." "Will that be enough?" "It'll have to be." He paused at the door, looking back at her with fierce determination in his pale eyes. "Clara, I'm not going to let him destroy you. I'm not going to let him take you away from us. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, we're going to fight this." They rode into town within the hour, pushing the horses harder than was probably wise given the still icy roads. Copper Ridge wasn't much of a town, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings, including the sheriff's office. But it was bigger than Clara had imagined, with perhaps 200 souls calling it home. The sheriff's office was a small wooden structure with bars on the windows and a tired-looking man sitting behind a desk when they walked in. He looked up from the papers he was reading, his weathered face creasing into a frown when he saw them. "Elias Turner, wasn't expecting to see you today. What brings you to town?" "We need to talk to you, Jim. It's important." Elias's hand was at the small of Clara's back, a gesture of support and solidarity. "This is Clara Wynne. She's been living at my place since January, helping with Mara and the household." Sheriff Jim Calloway's eyes moved to Clara, taking her measure with the practiced assessment of a man who'd spent years judging people's character at a glance. "Miss Wynne, I've heard about you. Mrs. Dallow speaks highly of you." "Thank you, Sheriff." Clara tried to keep her voice steady. "I appreciate that. But I'm afraid I'm here because there's a man named Daniel Fletcher who's come to town. He's from Boston, and he's claiming that I owe him money and that I stole from him. Neither charge is true." Calloway's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Fletcher. Yes, he was here yesterday. Showed me a photograph of you. Said you'd run out on debts and stolen property. He seemed pretty convinced of his story." "He would be, since he made it up." Clara's hands were clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. The truth is, I did owe him rent. 3 months' worth, $43 total. I left Boston without paying because I couldn't afford it and I needed to get away. That part is true, and I'm not proud of it. But I never stole anything from him. The theft charges are fabricated. That's a serious accusation, Miss Wynne. You're saying he's lying? I'm saying he's lying to extort more money than I actually owe him. He demanded $200 from us, threatened to take Elias's land if we couldn't pay. When we refused, he invented theft charges to force our hand. Calloway leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. And you can prove this? That the theft charges are false? Can he prove they're true? Elias interrupted. He says he has witnesses and documentation, but how do we know any of it's real? A man who'll quadruple a debt and threaten to take a family's land isn't above forging evidence. Fair point, Calloway looked between them. Here's the situation. Fletcher filed a formal complaint yesterday. He's claiming theft of property valued at approximately $150, a gold watch, silver candlesticks, and cash. He has affidavits from 2 witnesses who claim they saw Miss Wynne with these items. That gives me probable cause to investigate. Clara felt her stomach drop. Investigate how? Well, normally I'd need to bring you in for questioning, maybe hold you until we can sort out the truth, but he glanced at Elias, then back to Clara. I've known Elias Turner for 10 years. He's a good man, honest as they come. If he's standing beside you, vouching for you, that carries weight with me. And Mrs. Dallow's endorsement carries weight too. So I'm inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt, at least until I can investigate Fletcher's claims more thoroughly. Thank you. Clara felt tears of relief prick her eyes. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. If Fletcher's evidence is genuine, I'll have no choice but to act on it. But if it's fabricated like you say, well, filing false charges is a crime too. I don't take kindly to people who abuse the law for personal vendettas. Calloway stood up and pulled on his coat. I'll ride out to Fletcher's hotel, have a look at this evidence he's supposedly got. In the meantime, you two should go talk to anyone who can speak to Miss Wynne's character. The more people who vouch for her, the harder it'll be for Fletcher to make his case stick. They spent the next several hours doing exactly that. Mrs. Dallow was their first stop, and she was absolutely furious when she heard about Fletcher's threats. That snake, she hissed, her usually kind face twisted with rage. Coming into our town, threatening our people. Well, he picked the wrong woman to mess with. I'll testify, of course. I'll tell the sheriff and anyone else who'll listen that Clara Wynne is as honest as the day is long, and Daniel Fletcher is a lying scoundrel. Doc Morrison was their next visit. He was an elderly man with gentle hands and sharp eyes, and he remembered Clara from Mara's illness with obvious warmth. That girl of yours nursed little Mara through a dangerous fever with more skill than some trained nurses I've known, he told Elias. She knew exactly what to do, stayed up for days making sure the child pulled through. That's not the behavior of a thief or a criminal, that's the behavior of someone with a good heart. Miller, the shopkeeper, was equally supportive. Miss Wynne comes in here every week for supplies, always pays in full, never tries to shortchange me or steal anything. She's polite, respectful, and she treats my wife with kindness. That's good enough for me. By the time they returned to the sheriff's office, Clara was exhausted but cautiously hopeful. Surely with all these people willing to speak on her behalf, Fletcher's lies would crumble. But when they walked into the office, they found Fletcher already there, sitting in front of Calloway's desk with a smug expression on his face. His 2 hired men stood behind him, and the sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable. Ah, Miss Wynne, how convenient. I was just showing the sheriff my evidence. Fletcher gestured to the papers spread across the desk. These are affidavits from 2 witnesses who saw you in possession of my property. This is a receipt from a pawn shop in Denver where you allegedly sold my watch. And this, he held up a piece of paper with a flourish, is a report from a Pinkerton detective who tracked your movements from Boston to Wyoming, documenting your flight from justice. Clara stared at the papers in horror. They looked official. They looked real. Even though she knew they had to be forgeries, they were convincing forgeries. Sheriff, It's quite compelling, Miss Wynne. Calloway's voice was regretful. I'd like to believe you. I really would. But Mr. Fletcher has substantial documentation here. Unless you have evidence to counter his claims, she has us. The voice came from the doorway, and Clara turned to see Mrs. Dallow standing there, flanked by Doc Morrison, Miller the shopkeeper, and at least a dozen other townspeople. She has the word of every decent person in this county. Fletcher rolled his eyes. How touching. A lynch mob of character witnesses. But I'm afraid the law requires actual evidence, not just sentiment. Then let's talk about evidence. Mrs. Dallow pushed her way into the office, the crowd following behind her. You say Clara stole a watch and sold it at a pawn shop in Denver. But Clara never went to Denver. She came straight here from the train station at Copper Ridge. Elias found her there after she'd been waiting for 3 days in the cold. So she claims. So the station master will testify. He saw her there, saw her luggage with the Boston tag still on it. If she detoured to Denver to pawn stolen goods, those tags wouldn't match her story. Fletcher's smile faltered slightly. A small discrepancy. Perhaps she had an accomplice. And these witnesses of yours, Mrs. Dallow continued relentlessly, these people who supposedly saw Clara with your property, I noticed their affidavits aren't dated until after Clara left Boston. Convenient, isn't it? Almost like you paid them to remember things that never happened. That's a slanderous accusation. Is it? Then you won't mind if the sheriff telegraphs Boston and asks the police there to verify these witnesses exist and that their testimony is genuine, unless, of course, you're afraid of what they might find. Calloway was watching this exchange with growing interest. Mr. Fletcher, would you object to me verifying your evidence? Fletcher was starting to sweat now, his confidence cracking. I have a right to pursue my legitimate claims without being harassed by local yokels who... Careful, Mr. Fletcher. Calloway's voice was cold. Those local yokels are my neighbors and friends, and I'm starting to think they might be right about you. This is absurd. I have documentation. I have witnesses. Just because some frontier town wants to protect one of their own doesn't mean you can ignore legitimate evidence of a crime. But that's just it, said a new voice from the doorway. Your evidence isn't legitimate. Everyone turned to see a young man in a travel-worn suit standing there, holding a leather satchel. He looked exhausted, like he'd been riding hard for days, but his eyes were sharp and determined. Who are you? Calloway asked. Thomas Brennan. I'm a lawyer from Boston. He walked into the office and set his satchel on the desk, pulling out papers of his own. I've been following Mr. Fletcher's activities for some time now. He has a pattern, you see. He waits until female tenants get behind on their rent, then he forces them into untenable positions. If they can't pay, he fabricates theft charges and forces them to either pay inflated fees or accept his alternative arrangements. Fletcher had gone pale. This is outrageous. You have no proof. Don't I? Brennan pulled out a sheaf of papers. I have testimony from 6 other women Fletcher victimized this way. I have evidence of forged documents, paid witnesses, and fraudulent pawnshop receipts. I've been building a case against him for months, but he always managed to settle before it went to trial. When I heard he'd followed Miss Wynne all the way to Wyoming, I knew I finally had him cornered. He can't settle this one quietly. He's too far from his usual support network. You can't prove any of that? Fletcher was on his feet now, his face red with rage. This is a conspiracy. These people are all lying to protect a thief. Really? Then explain this. Brennan pulled out another document. This is the original lease agreement between you and Miss Wynne. Note the monthly rent, $12. Over 3 months, that's $36, not $43. You inflated the debt by 20% before you even started adding your fraudulent charges. A minor accounting error. And this, another document. A statement from your last tenant, a Miss Sarah Holloway, describing how you used the exact same tactics on her, claiming theft, producing false witnesses, demanding payment, or other compensation. She paid you rather than face the humiliation of false charges, but she's willing to testify now, as are the other 5 women I mentioned. Fletcher's face had gone from red to white. His hired men were shifting uncomfortably, clearly reconsidering their involvement in this scheme. The townspeople were muttering angrily, and Sheriff Calloway was looking at Fletcher with open disgust. Mr. Fletcher, Calloway said slowly, I'm placing you under arrest for filing false charges, attempted extortion, and fraud. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you exercise. Calloway stood up and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Take him to the cell. Fletcher's hired men backed away, hands raised. We were just hired for protection, one of them said quickly. We didn't know nothing about fraud or false charges. We're leaving. They were out the door before anyone could stop them. Fletcher was left alone, sputtering protests as Calloway cuffed him and led him toward the cell in the back of the office. Clara stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. One moment she'd been facing arrest and ruin, and the next, Miss Wynne. Thomas Brennan was standing in front of her, his hand extended. I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. If I'd arrived a day earlier, you might have been spared this ordeal entirely. Clara shook his hand numbly. I don't understand. How did you even know to come here? One of Fletcher's former victims contacted me after hearing he'd left Boston in pursuit of another woman. She was afraid of what he might do, afraid he might hurt someone the way he'd hurt her. She gave me your name and told me about his plans to follow you west. I've been tracking him for 2 weeks. He smiled tiredly. I'm just glad I made it in time. But why? Why would you go to all this trouble for women you don't even know? Brennan's expression darkened. Because Fletcher did this to my sister 3 years ago. She couldn't fight back. She didn't have anyone to stand up for her. She paid him everything she had and still ended up destitute. By the time I became a lawyer and could help her, the damage was done. She died last year, poor and broken, and convinced she was a criminal. His voice was thick with emotion. I can't save her, but I can save other women from the same fate. I can make sure Fletcher pays for what he's done. Clara felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me. Thank the women who were brave enough to come forward. Thank the people in this town who stood up for you, and thank this man. He nodded at Elias, who clearly loves you enough to fight for you. Elias's arm came around Clara's shoulders, pulling her close. She's worth fighting for. The next few hours passed in a blur. Thomas Brennan filed official charges against Fletcher on behalf of all his victims. Sheriff Calloway sent telegrams to the authorities in Boston, verifying Brennan's claims and coordinating Fletcher's transport back east to face justice. Fletcher himself was locked in the cell, still protesting his innocence, though no one was listening anymore. The townspeople eventually dispersed, but not before each one stopped to speak to Clara, to offer their support and welcome her officially as one of their own. Mrs. Dallow hugged her so hard Clara could barely breathe. Doc Morrison patted her hand and told her she was brave. Miller's wife pressed a jar of preserves into her hands and told her to come by the store anytime she needed anything. By the time they finally left town to retrieve Mara from Mrs. Dallow's house, Clara was emotionally wrung out, but lighter than she'd felt in years. The shadow that had been hanging over her, the fear that her past would destroy her future, was finally gone. Mara saw them coming and ran out to meet them, throwing herself at Clara with such force she nearly knocked her over. You're safe! You're both safe! I was so scared! The girl was crying, her thin arms wrapped around Clara's waist like she'd never let go. We're safe, sweetheart. Everything's all right now. The bad man can't hurt us anymore. Clara knelt down and held Mara properly, stroking her hair and letting her cry. Over the girl's head she met Elias's eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch. It was love. Pure, undisguised, overwhelming love. They rode home together as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold and pink. Mara sat in front of Elias on his horse, chattering about everything that had happened, asking 1,000 questions about Fletcher and the sheriff, and whether Clara was really, truly safe now. Really, truly safe, Clara assured her. He can't ever bother us again. Good, because you belong with us now, forever and ever. Forever and ever, Clara agreed, and found that she meant it with her whole heart. That night, after Mara was asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Elias sat together by the fire. They didn't talk. They'd done enough talking for one day. They just sat close, shoulders touching, hands intertwined, watching the flames dance and feeling the peace of crisis survived and danger past. Finally, Elias spoke. I was so afraid today.
When I saw all that fake evidence, when I thought they might actually arrest you, might take you away from us. His voice broke. I realized that I can't lose you, Clara. I can't. You've become too important, too essential. You're not going to lose me. I'm not going anywhere. I know, but today made me realize something else too. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to take things slow or be cautious or pretend this is something less than what it is. Clara's heart was pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you. I'm saying that you're not just someone helping out for the winter or a convenient solution to a problem. You're the woman I want to spend my life with, the woman I want to raise Mara with, the woman I want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of my days. He took a shaky breath. I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other for a few months, but Sarah taught me that life is short and precious, and when you find something good, you hold on to it with both hands. So I'm asking, Clara Wynne, will you marry me? Will you make this family official and permanent and real? Claire was crying again. She seemed to do nothing but cry these days, but for once they were happy tears. Yes, God, yes, I'll marry you. Elias pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste embraces they'd shared before. This was desperate and passionate and full of promise. It was the kiss of two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd fought for each other, who'd chosen each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Clara rested her forehead against his. I love you too. I should have said that first. I love you so much it scares me. Don't be scared. Not anymore. We've been through the worst. Everything from here on out is just living. Just living, Claire repeated and found herself smiling through her tears. I think I like the sound of that. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Copper Ridge, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Dallow served as matron of honor, and Doc Morrison stood up with Elias. Mara was flower girl, scattering wildflowers down the aisle with such enthusiasm that half of them ended up in people's hair. Thomas Brennan came back for the ceremony, bringing news that Fletcher had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and extortion. Clara wore a new dress, pale blue with white lace at the collar, that Mrs. Dallow and several other women had helped her sew. It wasn't fancy. They didn't have money for anything elaborate, but it was hers, made with care and love by her new community. As she walked down the aisle toward Elias, who was waiting for her with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elias kissed her softly, reverently, and the congregation erupted in cheers. At the reception afterward, held in the church hall with food contributed by everyone in town, Clara found herself surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, people who'd accepted her as one of their own, who'd fought for her when she needed it, who were celebrating her happiness like it was their own. I can't believe this is real, she whispered to Elias as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. 6 months ago, I was freezing on a train platform, convinced I'd made the worst mistake of my life. And now you're home, Elias finished. Right where you belong. That night, as they rode back to the ranch, their home, with Mara asleep in the back of the wagon, Clara looked up at the stars scattered across the wide Wyoming sky and felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. She'd spent her whole life running, searching, fighting for scraps of happiness and security. But she wasn't running anymore. She was home. Finally, impossibly, completely home. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing green shoots pushing up through the earth. True to their promise, Clara and Mara planted a garden, vegetables and herbs and, yes, roses. They worked side by side in the warming sun, their hands in the dark soil, planning and planting and laughing together. Elias built a proper fence around the garden to keep the deer out, and he added a bench where they could sit in the evenings and watch things grow. He smiled more now, laughed more easily, held Clara close whenever she was near enough to touch. The hardness that grief had carved into his face was softening, replaced by something warmer and more open. Mara bloomed too. She was still the same earnest, talkative child,
But there was a security in her now that hadn't been there before. She called Clara Mama without hesitation, and she no longer had nightmares about being abandoned. She was learning to read and write, practicing her letters in the evenings while Clara mended and Elias worked on ranch accounts. She was learning to cook, to garden, to care for the animals. She was learning what it meant to be part of a family that was whole and happy and here to stay. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the new bench watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, Mara turned to Clara with a serious expression. "I'm glad I wrote that letter," she said. "I know it was wrong to lie to Papa, but I'm still glad I did it, because it brought you to us." Clara pulled the girl close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. It was the best mistake anyone ever made." "It wasn't a mistake," Mara insisted. "It was fate. It was meant to be." "Maybe you're right. Maybe some things are just meant to be." Elias reached over and took Clara's hand, threading their fingers together. "Whether it was fate or chance or a 7-year-old girl with more courage than sense, I'm grateful for it. Every single day, I'm grateful." They sat there as the sun dipped below the mountains, 3 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of ways and built something beautiful from the pieces of their broken pasts. The garden was growing around them, roses beginning to bud, herbs sending their fragrance into the evening air. Inside the house behind them, a fire was burning in the hearth, dinner was waiting on the table, and all the small comforts of home were ready and welcoming. Clara had come west looking for survival, for escape, for anything that might be better than the life she was leaving behind. But she'd found so much more than that. She'd found love. She'd found family. She'd found a place where she mattered, where she was wanted, where she was home. She'd found everything she'd been searching for without even knowing she was searching, and now that she had it, she would never let it go. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear, they walked back to the house together, Mara between them holding both their hands. The warm light from the windows spilled out onto the porch, welcoming them home. Inside there would be laughter and conversation and the simple, profound comfort of being together. There would be challenges ahead, there always were, but they would face them as a family, standing together, fighting for what they'd built. Clara paused at the door and looked back one last time at the garden, at the land stretching out beyond it, at the mountains rising against the darkening sky. This was hers now, this life, this home, this family. Not because someone had given it to her or because she'd taken it, but because she'd earned it, because she'd been brave enough to answer a child's desperate letter, strong enough to survive what came after, and open enough to accept love when it was offered. She'd come to Wyoming expecting nothing, hoping for little, prepared for the worst. Instead, she'd found everything. And as Elias's arm came around her shoulders and Mara's small hand slipped into hers, Clara smiled and stepped across the threshold into the warm, bright house that was finally, truly, completely home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold and the dark, and all the hard years that had come before. Inside, there was only warmth and light, and the promise of all the good years still to come. Outside in the garden they'd planted together, roses were beginning to bloom under the stars, filling the night air with the sweet scent of new beginnings and hope fulfilled. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened very carefully, you might have heard the sound of a woman's quiet laughter, not bitter or broken anymore, but filled with the pure, uncomplicated joy of someone who had finally come home.